Jin wished he could wake up if all of this was just a dream. He was standing on top of an unknown mountain where a blizzard raged and the cold chilled him to the bone. Konohana Jin found himself at the very peak of a cursed mountain. As the wind whistled in his ears, he remembered how his sister always blamed others for any problems. Haruka treated people as if she herself was the embodiment of justice. She called out to Jin and told him to come over quickly. Haruka said that their aunt had given them food and asked why he wasn't eating. Jin replied that he simply didn't like the dish. His sister scolded him for being rude and stated that their aunt would be upset. The young man asked why she wasn't eating it herself then. He knew his sister was acting like her usual self again, as the food really didn't taste good. Haruka pressured him with words about their aunt to make him eat the dish, even though she hadn't even touched it herself. Jin thought that his sister always shifted everything onto others, blamed those around her, and yet considered herself absolutely in the right. That's why he tried to avoid her as much as possible. Haruka wearily said that they hadn't arrived yet. Jin, annoyed, thought she was repeating that too often. He wished his sister would just be quiet for a minute. He noticed she had no patience at all. After Jin got his driver's license, she constantly ordered him to drive her everywhere. Haruka sighed and said she was very tired. When Jin opened the trunk, he looked at the contents. There were bentos, drinks, and other items. His sister asked which bag contained the cake as it was the heaviest. She suggested that Jin carry it. Jin silently handed her the correct bag. His sister's friend took it from him. The girl, her friend, and their male friend walked ahead. Jin stayed behind and looked at the pile of luggage. He thought it was better to be alone than with them. He had already come so far and decided to keep going. Soon, he was going to leave to study in another prefecture. Jin dreamed of being free from his older sister's tyranny. Suddenly, he heard a scream. Jin became alert and was surprised by what was happening. He didn't understand where the parking lot was. The cars were gone. The young man couldn't recall how he ended up there. He wondered if it was all just a dream. There was no signal for his phone. Jin tried to calm down and decided to head downhill, hoping to spot a city. On the slope, he noticed a beautiful river and continued further down. Soon the ocean stretched out before him. Jin had walked a long way but hadn't encountered a single person. He saw no signs of climbers or any indication of a city. The guy tried to make sense of what was happening. He counted his supplies: water, tea, cola, snacks, and enough bento for 4 people. Jin was glad he'd brought a cooler bag. There was no trash around, which surprised him. He thought that maybe there were still some beaches left without garbage. The young man decided to prepare a spot for the night. He started to feel anxious, wondering if he'd be able to get back. The area was vast, so Jin began gathering branches. He was happy he'd brought his knife. He'd originally planned to use it to clear a spot to watch fireworks. But now it was proving useful for survival. He'd been forced to go to the fireworks against his will, all thanks to his tyrannical sister. A friend had once invited him on a mountain hike, and now Jin regretted turning him down. He'd also put off watching a survival show and was regretting that now too. Perhaps it would have been a way to escape his sister. Jin tried to start a fire with the branches. His arm ached and he didn't have much strength. He knew he needed to hurry before darkness fell. When smoke appeared, Jin breathed a sigh of relief. He carefully watched to make sure the fire didn't go out. He was glad he'd brought his jacket, as he wouldn't freeze now. Fatigue weighed him down, but he kept telling himself that everything was fine. Jin believed it was just a dream and that when he woke up, everything would be back to normal. He woke up in the morning. Jin realized it wasn't a dream. He saw that the fire was almost out. Jin quickly threw more wood on it to keep the flames from dying. He made it just in time and let out a sigh of relief. Jin thought that if he went in the other direction, he might be able to find a city. He decided he needed to gather more branches for the bonfire and for shelter. The wind was blowing harder and insects had bitten him, leaving marks on his skin. The endless ocean stretched all around, and Jin realized he was on an island. He understood that he couldn't find land because he was probably on the other side of the island. Even if he had a boat, he wouldn't know where to sail. He called out to someone, but only silence answered. Jin felt despair, wondering how everything had turned out this way. He remembered that he had simply gone with his older sister to watch fireworks, even though he hadn't wanted to. Now he realized he definitely wouldn't be seeing any fireworks. He continued gathering branches, but suddenly stopped and wondered why he needed them. A moment later, he remembered that the branches were for building a fire and keeping warm. During his search, Jin noticed a waterfall. He walked closer and thought about how beautiful it was around him. Even on this island, such picturesque places existed. He realized it was the source of a river and that the water flowed very close to the riverbed. Jin considered himself lucky as he could now replenish his water supply. He decided to gather more branches and return to his camp. Perhaps someone would notice the smoke from his fire. Jin began to understand that it looked like he would be staying here for a long time. He decided to build a house to shelter himself from the wind and rain. As the structure began to rise from the ground, Jin wondered if it would withstand the load. He considered whether he should reinforce the supports and strengthen the walls with earth and stones. Later, he ate his last bento and realized he would need to find food tomorrow. A rustle came from the darkness and Jin felt uneasy. He thought there might be an animal nearby, perhaps a rabbit or a wild boar. To protect himself, he decided to reinforce the walls of his shelter. After that, Jin sighed heavily, thinking about how much he wanted to take a bath. He went to the river and tried to catch some fish. In this quiet, uninhabited spot, fishing was easy. However, the fish tasted bland and Jin regretted not having any salt. He noted that he needed to figure out how to replenish his drinking water supply before it ran out. Jin pondered whether to drink water from the spring and decided he needed to focus on improving his home tomorrow. As he started working on his dwelling, he realized he had made significant progress. He covered the roof with branches and leaves, making the inside dark. Jin wondered if he should make a window out of bottles to let in some light. That day, he dug a drainage ditch and laid out stones to prevent water from flooding the house during rain. Among the stones, he noticed a cracked one and realized it could be useful. He decided to place it over an open fire to use as a heat source. It got cold at night and Jin was glad he had figured out a way to keep warm. He decided to take a bath in a small, albeit cramped, pond. After heating the stones, he carefully dropped them into the water. The water became hot and Jin felt the steam envelop his body. However, the stones started cracking and he realized he needed to be careful. Jin was tired of fried fish and crabs. He wanted to cook something like soup. He noticed that the leaves on the trees had started turning red. Bathing in the hot water brought relief, but it soon became cool again. Jin made some pottery to cook food in new ways. He was glad to have the necessary knowledge, as his diet would now become more varied. When he looked at his home, he felt a sense of pride. There was still work to be done, but he could see the progress. Suddenly, he noticed that a layer of snow covered the mountain. This signaled the approach of winter. Jin spotted some mushrooms on a tree and wondered if they were edible, but he decided it wasn't the time to take risks. The cold grew more intense. Jin realized that snow would soon fall here too, making fishing more difficult. He thought about trying to dry it. Up until now, he had managed to survive, but he was starting to have doubts. Thoughts of the future terrified him. He was afraid of dying here all alone with no hope of rescue. Suddenly, a ball of light appeared before him. A voice emanated directly from the glow. The entity apologized, saying it hadn't meant to involve him in what was happening. Jin was stunned, not understanding what was going on. The orb continued, explaining that it had accidentally summoned Jin when it was trying to summon a hero. This world wasn't the same as before, it was completely different. Confusion flashed through Jin's mind. He had accidentally ended up in this world. The summoning of heroes sounded incredible and incomprehensible. Jin addressed the glowing orb, demanding to be sent back. However, the luminous entity hesitated and quietly said it couldn't do that. It explained that Jin had been transported here right before his death. After saying this, the entity realized something strange with alarm and stated that it seemed Jin wasn't supposed to die. Jin frowned and said he didn't understand what it was talking about. He reminded the entity that it had spoken of another world. Jin looked around and said that he now found himself in a place where magic reigned and, presumably, swords existed. He chuckled to himself, not believing what was said. In his reasoning, it all sounded ridiculous. In the mountains where he was, there were no monsters or dungeons, unlike in fantasy stories. He asked if the entity was a spirit. The glowing creation confirmed it, but added that it had once been a deity. After summoning the heroes, its divine energy had been depleted, though it hoped it would recover over time. The entity continued, explaining that the word heroes wasn't entirely accurate. The summoning could refer to any living creature. The main goal of the ritual was to briefly connect two different worlds. When these worlds touch, the deity imbues this connection with a part of its power. Thanks to this, one world avoids destruction due to excessive materialization, and the other receives a particle of a living being, thereby being saved from extreme spiritualization. Jin tried to make sense of what he heard but understood nothing. The glowing deity added that the number of summoned heroes was limited. The ritual required 3 people who were on the verge of death in their own world. The entity confessed that it hadn't known Jin was also transported along with the others. Jin heard a familiar name and tensed. He realized it was Haruka, his older sister. Jin said that his sister, it seemed, had become a hero. The spirit confirmed this. Jin started to ponder. He realized that 3 beings had been summoned during the ritual. Perhaps he was also on the verge of death, but the glowing entity said that Jin shouldn't have died at all. This meant his presence here was a mistake. The spirit stated that Jin's world was too noisy and chaotic. Suddenly, other spirit-like beings appeared before him. One of them, named Van, addressed the first spirit, expressing his displeasure. He said that they could talk later, but for now, they should listen to the person from another world. The elder spirit tried to justify himself, saying that an accident had occurred. He explained that a certain rich had failed, causing too much energy to flow into the connection. That's why the summoning radius expanded. The spirit claimed it wasn't his fault. Jin mentally disagreed, believing the fault was entirely his. One of the spirits said it wasn't the time for arguments. Then, a woman with a soft voice spoke. She called Jin a young man from another world and asked whom he would choose as his patron. Van explained that Jin wouldn't be able to return home. Therefore, he would be allowed to choose a patron god. Usually, the deity who performed the summoning became the patron. This deity would grant strength, protection, skills, and help him survive in the new world. The deity could bestow physical strength, magic, charisma, wealth, and many other abilities. Van introduced himself as the god of fire and destruction. He also possessed restoration abilities. The other spirits then introduced themselves. One of them, Ludier, wielded the power of earth and silence. Kadar controlled plants and order. Ish controlled water and could heal. Pal was associated with the earth and harvest. Misto commanded light, wind, love, and desires. Halalfa embodied light, beauty, and love. Finally, Rich's name was mentioned. They said he had lost most of his power. His elements were ice and darkness. However, he had almost no energy left and could barely exist. The glowing spirit mockingly said that Rich was on the verge of disappearing, even though he used to be a confident and proud being. Jin irritably thought that the glowing orb was acting like an arrogant child and mentally ordered it to shut up. Then he calmly asked if Rich could ever regain his powers. Van replied that everything has a beginning and an end. He added that they were not the only deities in this world, as there were others. Misto chuckled softly and said that they were only called gods because they were strong enough to earn that title. After that, Van turned to Jin again and said that it was now time to choose. Jin looked at the assembled spirits and after some thought said that he wanted to choose all of them at once. Kadar looked at Jin and calmly explained that his lifespan in his previous world was not long enough to accept power from every deity simultaneously. He added that the powers of all the present spirits contradicted each other, and if Jin tried to combine them, his protection would significantly weaken. Moreover, the deities themselves weren't close enough to compromise for one person. Kadar emphasized that such a decision wouldn't benefit Jin, as the outcome directly depended on the strength and character of the chosen patron. Van stated that if he were to grant Jin pure power, the result would manifest instantly. However, if he chose to bestow magic upon him, the effect would be almost useless. Misto added that the same would happen with charisma. In her case, it would transform into love. With Pal, it would become friendship. And with Halalfa, it would most likely turn into obsession. Jin sighed, realizing how complicated everything was, and mentally noted that it was impossible to grasp it all at once. Kadar suggested he think about what he wanted to do in this new world so the deities could select the most suitable skills. Jin pondered for a moment and then said he simply wanted to live a peaceful and comfortable life. He didn't want to be bound by unnecessary ties and aimed to stay far away from his sister. Furthermore, he desired to possess power that would allow him to travel freely throughout the world. Kadar listened carefully to his words and asked if he wished to interact with the hero, hinting at Haruka. However, the glowing orb intervened and joyfully declared that Haruka was a wonderful girl, hardworking, possessed a strong sense of justice, and was his chosen one. Jin mentally scoffed, noting that this being was merely using justice as an excuse to shift responsibility onto others. The glowing orb, ignoring his reaction, continued. It said that when Haruka received the god's gifts, Jin must have felt a surge of energy. Kadar clarified that whenever a person uses gifts or abilities, the deity's power intensifies. Jin frowned and mentally noted that the orb was trying to protect Haruka. He then said that it seemed his sister also received abilities, and he inquired what exactly she was given. The glowing spirit replied that Haruka received full magic and the gift of dominance. Hearing this, Jin mentally cursed and decided that now, more than ever, he should avoid any connection with her. Kadar then announced the specific skills Jin would receive. Among them were magical talent, martial arts, production, healing, complete cooking, storage, teleportation, search, appraisal, psychic resistance, language knowledge, freedom, bond severance, and even a special ability called Hero Killer. Jin mentally chuckled, realizing that he had just said he didn't want to get involved with his sister, yet they still gave him a skill related to destroying heroes. After that, he briefly confirmed that he agreed with the choice. Kadar handed him an item and said that he couldn't get by without it in the new world. Jin was surprised to realize it was a sword. Kadar explained that this blade was capable of cutting through almost any material. Van added that wherever Jin went, the sword would always follow him. He also mentioned that it could accelerate plant growth. Jin thanked the spirits for everything they had done. Kadar replied that they were the ones who should be grateful, as Jin hadn't complained, even though they had moved him to another world without his consent. Jin paused for a moment, then, with a slight smile, asked if he could bring the puppy along. Wang looked at him and said that Rich was blind and had lost all his strength, so he couldn't offer anything but himself. Jin calmly replied that he didn't mind and introduced himself, saying he was pleased to meet him. Wang then stated that it was time to say goodbye and informed Jin that he and Rich would be sent to a safe and comfortable home. He also warned that all the abilities Jin had received were fully compatible with each other, so he needed to use them carefully. A desire flashed through Jin's mind to finally find a place where he could live peacefully and comfortably, free from fear and turmoil. When he looked around, he was surprised by how beautiful the surrounding landscape was. Hills stretched everywhere and the air was warm, even though it was winter. He noticed that the building he was in looked more like a luxurious mansion than an ordinary house. Then Jin noticed his reflection and was astonished by the change in his appearance. His face was different, and he remembered the deities saying that his appearance and clothes would adapt to the style customary for this world. His new face looked like a combination of features from three young men, which made him feel a bit awkward. He even chuckled to himself, feeling like their son. When he entered the house, he was amazed by its size. The spaciousness, light, and coziness were incredible. As he explored the rooms, Jin suddenly noticed something interesting, a pantry filled with countless food items that seemed like they would never run out. On the shelves were bags of rice, fresh Napa cabbage, potatoes, tea leaves, miso, soy sauce, various types of mushrooms, and nearby lay cuts of beef, pork, and chicken. Jin couldn't even believe his eyes, it all felt like a dream. He moved closer and discovered that the pantry also stored fish, bright orange salmon, and fresh Pacific sari. For a moment, it felt as if a portal leading directly to Japan was before him. After those meager days on the island where food was limited to fish and crabs, he felt true happiness awaken within him. Jin decided it was finally time to eat, but first he wanted to enjoy a hot bath. He submerged himself in the water and felt the warmth spread through his body. He experienced pure bliss, wondering when he had last taken a proper bath. Then he started thinking about what to cook for dinner and remembered the skills he had acquired. Activating his appraisal ability, Jin realized he needed to open the sluice gate to get the water wheel moving. This device turned out to be amazing. It could be used to mill rice. He remembered Wang saying that Rich couldn't give anything but himself. Jin concluded that the puppy had become his protector and might eventually regain its strength from the energy emanating from him. Approaching Rich, he warmly told him he'd bring him meat once he recovered. After that, Jin got busy cooking. He chose a fillet steak with cabbage as a side dish, surprised by how strange the combination seemed to him. However, it was the dish he wanted to try most right now. When the food was ready, the aroma of fish, crabs, and roasted meat filled the house. Jin smiled and wished himself a good meal. He savored every bite. The salt and pepper perfectly complemented the sauce, and the freshly cooked rice was incredibly tender. The cabbage turned out soft but retained a slight crunch. He felt pure bliss, as if he had found a heavenly corner where everything was finally calm and safe. After dinner, Jin lay down on the bed and let out a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he remembered he'd left the fire in the stove, but he waved it off, deciding it would go out on its own. Checking the locks also seemed unnecessary. It was unlikely anyone could get in. Lying on the soft bed, he pondered the fact that he would now truly live here, in this unknown world. The bed was so comfortable and soft that his body relaxed, but falling asleep felt unfamiliar. Exactly 1 week had passed since Jin settled into his new home. He had spent all those days inactive, succumbing to the fatigue accumulated during his time on the island. He only got up to eat, after which he would go back to sleep, allowing his body to rest. His healing skill had fully restored his physical condition, but the internal exhaustion remained. It seemed that living alone on the island had drained him much more than he had anticipated. Now, he felt it was time to do something productive. While doing laundry, he was happy about how simple and convenient even the most mundane tasks had become with his new skills. Jin was still amazed by the opportunities the gods had opened up for him. Using his ingredient appraisal skill, he noticed that activating this ability automatically triggered his full cooking skill. Recipes for dishes that could be made from the available ingredients appeared on the screen in front of him. Carrots unlocked access to stewed potatoes, salad, cabbage, and kinpira. Chicken allowed him to cook teriyaki, fried chicken, chikuzanai, and urinkai. From eggs, he could make tamagaki, omuris, warm chawanmushi, or simply boiled eggs. Jin noted how convenient it was to see ready-made recipes right before his eyes. The only drawback was that the system only offered dishes he had already tried at some point. He thought this was a good reason to travel and try new flavors. While pondering this, he decided to cook something unusual and wanted to make ramen. However, after checking the ingredients, he realized that the mackerel and seaweed needed to be dried, which would take time. So Jin decided that dinner would be rice again. To diversify his diet in the future, he planned to grind wheat, as flour could be useful often. He realized he should make a lot of it, but ran into a problem. There were no bags or containers in the house for storage. The gods had given him a map and some money, and he thought it was finally time to go to the market. With these thoughts, he activated the teleport, choosing the destination that the deities had previously recommended. Soon, he found himself in a new place and saw a walled city before him. This was the border city of Canum, located near the demonic forest, where various monsters were rumored to reside. Such places always attracted many adventurers, as one could earn money and grow stronger by fighting monsters there. At the city gates, a guard stopped him, demanding an identity document and an entrance fee. Jin calmly presented everything necessary. He knew he had the status of a free knight, but he decided to register with the Adventurers Guild to avoid paying a toll every time he visited the city. He noticed that people were looking at him more intently than at others. Jin wondered if he stood out too much with his new clothes or unusual appearance, which had been altered for this world. So his first stop was a clothing store where he bought several items to look more natural. His mood improved and he continued his stroll through the city. After visiting several shops, Jin realized that the money given to him by the gods was quite a large sum. His sister probably received the same amount. In one of the stores, he noticed an expensive potion that reminded him of healing potions from games. The prices were high, but his appraisal skill allowed him to determine the ingredient's composition. Jin decided that he would try to make a similar remedy himself later. At the butcher shop, he considered trying the local cuisine but checked the products with his appraisal ability just in time. It turned out the meat contained dangerous bacteria, so he decided not to buy it. Continuing his walk, he stumbled upon a beautiful grapevine and learned that he could buy farming tools there. He approached the female vendor and asked to buy tools, as well as a grapevine sapling. The woman agreed and kindly told him he could take whatever he needed. Jin thanked her and decided that all he had left to buy was a weapon. Noticing his interest, the woman recommended a good shop and said that leather armor was best for beginner adventurers. Metal, she explained, heats up quickly in the summer and can be uncomfortable. Jin thanked her and headed to the address she gave him. Inside the weapon shop, he felt like he was in a role-playing game. He picked up the first sword he saw and, after assessing its balance, realized it was actually quite comfortable. When he tried to use his appraisal ability, he noticed he didn't have much understanding of weaponry, so the skill only provided basic information. In the end, Jin bought that sword, tools to maintain it, a belt, and 2 knives. He also acquired leather armor made from monster goat hide, a waist pouch, and a special bag for carrying monster carcasses. After his purchases, he felt tired and decided to rest. Fortunately, there was an inn nearby. He remembered that the city gates closed in the evening, and using a teleport inside was forbidden to avoid suspicion. Jin decided to leave some of his luggage at the inn and return home, where Rich was waiting for him. Tomorrow, he planned to come back to the city, register with the Adventurers Guild, and start a new chapter of his life. The receptionist calmly explained to Jin that he needed to pay an entrance fee to register with the guild. Alternatively, he could complete 1 free quest from the guild, and she asked which option he would choose. Without hesitation, Jin decided to pay the fee, preferring to avoid any extra obligations. The girl nodded and said he would have to wait a bit for his adventurer card to be ready. While she was processing the paperwork, Jin picked up a book from the shelf and started reading entries about the demonic forest. He was interested in the information about the creatures living there. He pondered that the monsters inhabiting this forest might simply be ordinary animals possessed by evil spirits. In contrast, there were sacred beasts, and this seemed interesting to Jin. He decided to start by studying the local topography, identifying areas where monsters frequently appeared, learning how to defeat them, and figuring out what materials to use. Just then, a well-built man with short, light hair approached him. He asked if Jin was the one who had requested an escort to learn the basics of being an adventurer. Jin confirmed it was him and explained that he wanted to understand how everything worked. He added that he wasn't confident in his own abilities and wouldn't mind some helpful advice. He noted to himself that since he had never been in a battle before, he decided to request an escort with a safe group, if only to see firsthand how others operated. However, he felt a bit awkward when he realized only 1 person had shown up, not an entire team. The man introduced himself as Dean and said he held a 2 silver star rank. He explained that he was obligated to train 5 new recruits for the guild and that Jin would be the last of that group. Jin was mentally impressed to learn he was facing an instructor and understood why he had come alone. As Jin introduced himself, he habitually mumbled his name and then stopped short when he realized he had said the same name as the instructor. Dean, noticing this, laughed and said it was funny. They were namesakes. At that moment, an indignant female voice came from behind the counter. She yelled for Dean to wait and accused him of acting on his own initiative again. Dean irritably told her to shut up, adding that he didn't want to deal with nobles and wasn't going to let himself be used however anyone pleased. Jin noted to himself that it seemed the guild really did prefer to fulfill requests from aristocrats, which made the situation quite troublesome. He didn't want to get caught up in their internal conflicts and calmly stated that he didn't wish to be the cause of their disagreements. Dean apologized to him and promised to sort out the situation. He explained to the girl that one of their members, named Chris, would return tomorrow. This person was always happy to fulfill requests from aristocrats, even if they weren't official guild orders. Dean added that the only requirement for such tasks was a silver rank, meaning he wasn't the only one who could perform them. The girl countered that if they relied solely on Chris, there would only be 1 person capable of interacting with nobles, and that would create a problem. Dean, raising his voice, declared that he wasn't going to be a constant intermediary between the guild and the aristocrats. He believed it was the organization's business, not individual adventurers, and emphasized that they couldn't dump all the responsibility on 1 person. The girl tried to de-escalate the argument, saying that there were currently only 2 silver-ranked adventurers in the guild, and asked him to at least compromise temporarily. Jin noticed she kept glancing at him and irritably thought to himself that he didn't want to be dragged into their internal affairs and just wanted to go home. At that moment, another woman from the reception desk, with a calm but authoritative voice, intervened in the conversation. She demanded they stop arguing, addressing the girl by the name Amila, and accused her of abusing her position as a younger sister. Dean thanked Kaina for her intervention. She, in turn, reproached him, saying that he was to blame for Amila becoming so spoiled. She added that Dean could refuse the request to train a novice, but in that case, he would be obligated to choose one of the candidates recommended by the guild. Kaina then turned to Jin and bowed politely, apologizing for him having to witness such a shameful scene. Jin mentally noted that just when he thought they knew each other too well, it turned out they were indeed relatives. He acknowledged that some siblings have normal relationships, but he felt awkward being present for their family squabble. Jin calmly said there was no need to worry and stated that he was withdrawing his request. Amila immediately perked up and happily said that in that case the guild would find him another, more suitable group. However, Jin clarified that she had misunderstood him and said he didn't want any escort at all. He asked to completely withdraw his request. Dean looked at him in surprise but said nothing. Kano apologized again for the inconvenience and promised that the guild would refund all the money he had paid. Jin calmly stated that payment wasn't necessary and instead suggested taking an adventurer's handbook. Kano readily agreed to the exchange. A flicker of annoyance crossed Jin's mind about how sisters loved to torment their brothers with talk and nitpicking. He found it a disgusting display of familial relations which he preferred to avoid. Suddenly, Miss To appeared nearby and asked why he hadn't used the ability called Bond Break. Jin was surprised to learn he could communicate with her telepathically, as only he could see spirits like her. Miss To explained that this method of communication was common for guardians and spirits. Jin worried if she could read his thoughts, but the spirit reassured him, saying she only saw the ones he wished to show. He breathed a sigh of relief. Miss To playfully added that she wouldn't mind if he thought about indecent things, to which Jin coldly replied that she would have to do without it. He explained that if he used Bond Break, it would be impossible to undo, but despite that, he wouldn't hesitate to use the ability against his sister. Miss To approved of his resolve but cautioned him, explaining that the wider the ability's effect, the weaker its impact. She clarified that if Jin used Bond Break on one person, others would still continue to talk about him. Since the ability affects many at once, its power weakens. Jin understood the meaning and thanked Miss To for the clarification. She giggled and reminded him not to forget to use his skills, as that's how they become stronger. After her words, Jin wondered if Miss To would have come with advice if he had already used the ability. He decided not to worry about being alone and that it was better to act by himself. According to the guidebook, monster rabbits live near the demonic forest and some of them have horns. The weaker ones are called hornless because their horns are no bigger than a bean. Confident in his abilities, Jin decided he could handle such monsters. After making sure no one was around, he used his weapon, the all-cutting sword, Zanzenken. This blade is convenient to store in spatial storage, which can hold anything except living creatures. He noticed a regular rabbit, but soon saw another one with pea-sized horns and dark circles under its eyes. Jin realized this was the opponent he needed. With one swift strike, he killed the monster and was surprised to realize he had dealt with it in an instant. He noted that the hornless rabbit was too weak and wondered how different the result would have been if he had used a sword bought from a store. Deciding to drain the blood later, he noticed that using a regular sword made no difference. Soon, new opponents appeared, horned rabbits this time. While exploring the area, Jin noticed unusually beautiful grass. Using his appraisal skill, he discovered it was a medicinal herb used in making potions. He carefully placed the find in his storage. Raspberries and currants grew nearby, and Jin was amazed at how rich this forest was with nature's bounty compared to the desolate mountain island where he used to live. He realized that his appraisal and storage skills were incredibly useful. Seeing familiar mushrooms, he used appraisal again and confirmed they were edible. Jin thought it would have been good to know this earlier. Suddenly, he sensed the presence of a monster. This creature was far more dangerous than the rabbits. A huge horned bear emerged from the shadows, and it became clear that a real challenge now awaited him. Jin was surprised at how easily he was able to destroy the enemy. He noted that his sword was indeed capable of cutting through any obstacle without the slightest effort. At that moment, Miss To unexpectedly appeared, and Jin reacted sharply, reminding her not to pop up so suddenly again. The spirit quietly apologized. Jin admitted that he didn't understand much about magic yet, though he knew it was essential at his level. He decided to try casting a spell, but first he needed to find a suitable monster. Miss To stopped him, suggesting he use his search skill instead of running around aimlessly. Jin remembered that he had indeed acquired this skill, but had almost forgotten about it. Using the search skill, he found a monster nearby, a rabbit. Jin mentally chided himself for not remembering this ability sooner. Miss To advised him to first consider what kind of magic he wanted to use and to visualize the corresponding attributes. Jin didn't immediately understand what she meant and asked for clarification. Miss To explained that there were different elements. There was Van's fire, Ludir's earth and silence, Kadar's earth, plants and order, Isha's water and healing, Halalfa's light, Rich's ice and darkness, and finally light and wind, which were associated with Miss To herself. All these attributes were available to Jin. He concentrated and imagined a cutting wind. Soon he succeeded, the spell worked. He thanked Miss To for her help. The spirit warned him that as he progressed, he would receive support from other spirits, as a talent for magic was a rare gift that required caution. Jin decided it was time to sell his trophies at the guild. He looked at the enormous bear carcass and doubted it would fit in his storage. Ultimately, he went to the merchant guild and approached a man, asking him to appraise and buy his loot. The man, seeing the bear carcass sticking out of Jin's backpack, was very surprised and asked if Jin had really come there looking like that. Jin calmly confirmed it. The man admitted he didn't mean to be rude but was simply astonished by what he saw. Jin mentally noted that it was better to come like this than to carry a severed monster head. He was used to the sight of gutted carcasses hanging everywhere. Previously, it would have stressed him out. Now, with his mental resistance skill, he could calmly process the bodies of slain creatures. On the island, he had only ever butchered fish, but now he was much more experienced. The man, appraising the trophies, praised his work. He noted that all the hides were intact, meaning Jin was not only strong but also meticulous. He added that the Adventurers Guild might pay more and asked if Jin was sure he wanted to sell everything there. Jin confirmed, explaining that he had already been warned about the price difference, but it was more convenient for him this way, as he didn't want to deal with that troublesome brother and sister from the other guild. The man informed him that processing and finalizing the purchase would take about 15 minutes. Jin agreed and also asked where he could learn to make potions. The seller explained that recipes were sold in the next department, and he could also go to the Doctors Guild or to alchemists where they teach potion creation. He added that the Merchant Guild also had educational materials, but only for members of the organization. Jin noted to himself that everything here was thought out down to the smallest detail. He thanked the man and said he would go get the recipes while the man finalized the transaction. The man replied that he could manage without him. Jin picked up several scrolls and examined them carefully. There were many records ranging from cooking recipes to instructions for firing bricks. He realized that potion recipes were quite simple to execute, especially if a person had divine power. Such abilities enhance body characteristics and allow for healing injuries not only with potions, but also with recovery magic. Nevertheless, he decided not to show off his abilities and to pretend that he was using ordinary means. On his way back, Jin planned to buy the necessary alchemy tools to gradually master the art of potion making and strengthen his skills. Jin stood next to the man who informed him that a magic stone had been found inside the monster's carcass. He held it out and offered it for Jin to see. Jin, with inner excitement, recalled reading about such stones in the Adventurer's Handbook. The book stated that magic stones form inside rare monsters when the spirit in their heart transforms into a precious crystal. He was surprised by how small the stone was, as he had expected to see something the size of a ping-pong ball. The man explained that it was a red spinel, the most valuable of all types of magic stones. He congratulated Jin on his good fortune. Jin thanked him and the man asked if he intended to sell the find, noting that a stone of that color and size could become a source of powerful fire magic. Jin calmly agreed to sell the stone, explaining that he already possessed magic and did not need it. He thought that after the transaction, he should take a walk around the city and grab a bite to eat before dusk. At the market, his attention was drawn to the aroma of fresh bread with sauerkraut, ham, and cheese. Using his appraisal skill, he confirmed that the food was well-baked and free of harmful bacteria. He then ordered a sausage and noted that it seemed greasy, but considering the number of adventurers in the city, high caloric content was appropriate here. He noticed a stall with dried fruits, tried them, and frowned, feeling a strong sourness. The thought crossed his mind that they could be boiled in sugar and used as an ingredient for sweets or as a spice for meat dishes. At the neighboring stall, they were selling brown sugar in chunks, weighing it on antique scales that exuded an old-world charm. Jin inhaled, catching the aroma of sake. He wondered if he was allowed to drink alcohol, as he didn't know the legal drinking age in this world. The crowd at the next stall caught his attention. They were selling roasted pork, served right inside bread. He bought a portion, took a bite, and was amazed by the taste. The pork skin was crispy and fragrant, while the filling was juicy and tender. Only the bread seemed a bit bland. He thought about how everything in his home's pantry was neatly organized and sorted, but fresh dishes like this were nowhere to be found. An unexpected thought crossed his mind: maybe he should get his own pig. Upon returning home, Jin called Rich and told him that he had eaten little today because his stomach had shrunk after living on the island. He explained that he had successfully hunted monsters and earned some money, though he had spent almost all of it on buying tools for brewing potions. He noted mentally that Rich wasn't sick or injured, just completely drained of strength. Even though the treatment wasn't helping, Jin continued to do it, wanting to support him in some way. He quietly wished Rich good night, then sat down to eat his own dinner. While eating, he thought that the fabric he had seen at Kanuma's shop was of poor quality, which was why he hadn't bought it. Jin remembered that he possessed the language comprehension skill and decided to use it to read books about the world he now lived in. Having made up his mind, he planned to go to the royal capital tomorrow. When he arrived there, he was astonished by its size and scale. Jin noted that this was his first visit to such a massive city, where even the streets seemed like labyrinths. He approached a city guard to ask if there were any maps or special guides available. The guard handed him a simple guide map and explained that if he was there for shopping, it would be easier to go to the Merchants Guild, where they could help him acquire everything he needed. The guard also added that children often gathered in the city square and would gladly show him all the sights for a small fee. Jin thanked the guard, handed him the payment, and said he could keep the change. The guard smiled and advised Jin that if he met a guy with gray-blue hair named Leon in the capital, it would be best to ask him for help. Jin nodded and replied that he understood. He noted mentally that if anything went wrong, he could always just escape to a neighboring kingdom. He walked through the streets, observing the many small buildings connected by bridges and walkways. It all looked surprisingly picturesque and lively. He finally reached the square and remembered what the guard had said about Leon. Near the well, he spotted a young man with gray-blue hair and realized it was likely the person he was looking for. He approached, politely introduced himself, and asked if he was Leon. The guy responded affirmatively, his gaze cold and wary. Jin asked him to show him around the city, feeling his companion's piercing stare, full of distrust and hidden power. Jin awkwardly told Leon that the guard had mentioned he could get a city tour. Leon seemed surprised and asked if the guard had really sent him. Jin noticed Leon's gaze turn menacing and tense, which made him uneasy. He wondered if he had been tricked or if there had been some kind of mistake. He tried to explain himself, but Leon suddenly calmed down and said that the circumstances were fortunate, as he happened to have free time and would agree to show him the city. Jin noted with relief that Leon didn't seem as angry as he first appeared. He asked if there were any must-see places in the city. Leon replied that the most beautiful view could be enjoyed from the top of the citadel, but noted that ordinary people were forbidden from entering there. Jin wondered if Leon was hinting at his own special status or if he shouldn't have mentioned inaccessible places at all. Then he suggested going to a clothing store or getting something to eat. Leon remarked that it was too early for lunch and said he knew a popular clothing store they could go to. Jin was internally surprised why his companion was making such a frightening face, even though he was speaking quite calmly. To lighten the mood, he asked why the walls of the houses in the city were connected to each other. Leon patiently explained that the land within the city walls was limited, and the tax amount depended on the width of the house's facade facing the road. Therefore, residents connected their walls, reducing the taxable area. Jin became interested and asked about other types of taxes. Leon listed market, transport, municipal, and even a glass tax. Upon hearing about the latter, Jin was surprised as he didn't know such a thing was possible. Leon explained that glass windows were considered a luxury item, so they were rarely found in poor homes. Jin remembered that he had indeed rarely seen glass windows in the city of Kanum, and realized it all made sense. He changed the subject and asked about the large building in the square. Leon clarified what it was, and Jin replied that it was the spirit branch, a place created to the spirit's own liking. He explained that many plants grew in the courtyard and clean water flowed through the area, creating a sense of peace. Jin realized that spirits were truly worshipped in this city. Leon apologized, saying that they probably should have started their tour from that very place. Jin calmly replied that he would check it out on the way back. He noted to himself that Leon wasn't so bad, although as a guide, he was quite reserved and dry. Suddenly, a man in a sharp uniform interrupted their conversation. He hurried over and addressed Leon, calling him a young lady. Jin froze, stunned by the phrase. He noted in his mind that, judging by his clothes, the man was a butler. He felt a flood of questions in his head, but the most important one was why Leon was called a lady. Leon, noticing his confusion, explained that this was not a man who had been by his side since childhood and now served as the Adelheid family's butler. Jin barely managed to keep himself from asking again, as this was clearly not the answer he expected. Leon asked why Not had come, and Not was about to explain when a girl rushed over to them. She said they were being pursued and warned that it was dangerous to stay in the city. Jin noted that he was seeing her for the first time and guessed that it was probably Lilith. The girl informed them that a carriage was already prepared for their escape. Leon stubbornly said he wasn't going to run away, but Not politely countered that it wouldn't be a flight, but a strategic retreat. Leon wanted to object, but Lilith sharply punched him in the stomach and apologized, explaining that they needed to act fast. Not worriedly said that the young lady was injured and looked at Lilith. She was flustered and asked why they hadn't used a healing potion yet. Not replied that when she left the Adelheid family, she couldn't take her belongings with her. Jin watched what was happening and couldn't understand what exactly was going on. An irritated thought flashed through his mind that everything happening felt like complete chaos. Lilith looked around and said they were attracting too much attention, so they needed to leave quickly. Jin calmly handed over the potion. He thought that he had just made this potion and could now test its effects. The assessment showed it was safe, so Jin hoped the medicine would quickly help Leon recover. Lilith addressed Jin, not knowing who he was. Jin calmly replied that his name was Jin and that Mr. Leon was just showing him around the city. Not added that they were just heading to Tame's shop. After a brief thought, Lilith offered to take Jin with them and drop him off on the way, telling him to get into the carriage. Not holding the vial, turned to Leon and offered him the healing potion. Jin worriedly thought that his potion seemed to have really worked. He remembered that he originally wanted to test it on himself, but events unexpectedly took a completely different turn. Lilith thanked him for his help, noting that without him, it would have been much harder for them. Not politely added that Jin had really helped them all out, to which Jin shyly replied that it was nothing, though he felt awkward internally. He admitted to himself in his thoughts that he no longer cared about the clothing store and just wanted to get out of the carriage as quickly as possible, where everyone around him seemed strange and caught up in their own problems. Leon woke up and, looking confused, asked where he was. Not calmly explained that they were inside the carriage. Still a bit stunned, Leon spoke bitterly, saying that even though he was kicked out of his home, he was sure he hadn't done anything wrong. Lilith gently replied that she knew perfectly well Leon was innocent, but his younger brother seemed content with just the thought of him being alive. She added bitterly that this cunning younger relative had not only unfairly banished Leon, but also accused him of a crime he never committed. Listening to this conversation, Jin mentally groaned that he was once again caught up in family disputes, which he had so diligently tried to avoid. He thought that he hadn't expected such composure from someone being pursued by their family, and he also wondered why an exile was suddenly giving city tour. Not anxiously suggested that the young lady leave the place as soon as possible. Jin again noted to himself the strangeness of not calling Leon a young lady. After a while, the carriage stopped and a man approached them, addressing Leon as Lady Adelheid. Leon, gritting his teeth, briefly replied that he was glad to see an old acquaintance, but there was no time. He asked Tame to prepare clothes for Mr. Jin and apologized for having to interrupt their tour. Jin mentally thought that an apology wasn't really necessary, as the situation had clearly gone beyond a simple outing. He quietly said that Leon probably needed to hurry, and Leon agreed, entrusting all matters to Tame. Lilith approached Jin and politely introduced herself. She informed him that she belonged to the Diverland family and handed him a small item, explaining that it could be used to gain an audience with her if the need ever arose. However, she warned that they were currently facing serious problems, and it would be best to avoid contact with them for a while. Jin nodded and asked why Lilith referred to Leon as a young lady. Lilith looked surprised, clarifying if he didn't know that Leon was just a pseudonym, and her companion's real name was Lyra Adelheid. Jin was stunned, unable to believe what he had heard. Lilith, smiling slightly, added that Lyra had a flat chest, a stern face, and strength that any man would envy. That's why many mistake her for a guy and call her Leon. After a brief pause, Lilith apologized for the confusion and quickly headed for the exit. Once she left, Tame awkwardly turned to Jin and warned him that all the clothes here were custom-made, meaning the prices were quite high. Jin sighed, thinking ironically that, as usual, he was only informed of important details after he had already agreed. He noticed that there were no ready-made goods anywhere in the shop and mentally concluded that it wasn't a store at all, but a proper tailor's atelier. A seamstress approached him, politely asked for permission to take his measurements, and offered him a choice of fabric and buttons. Later, returning home, he felt tired. His thoughts were muddled, but he noted that he hadn't forgotten anything and all the necessary items had been purchased. Thanks to his search skill, he easily found a small fabric shop nearby where he bought sheets and blankets. All that was left was to deal with the books. He remembered not advising him to visit a good restaurant, but decided he should have lunch first. Jin returned home and decided to read one of the books he had recently bought. As it grew dark, he noticed that the candlelight was barely enough and thought about creating a lamp. He didn't have alcohol, but he had a little rapeseed oil left. He figured that if he used a mirror or a well-polished piece of metal, he could direct the light. At that moment, he recalled Miss Toe's words about needing to mentally visualize the attributes of magic and tried to focus on the image of light. Soon, a soft glow illuminated the room. He was surprised by how convenient this method was and, with a slight smile, thought that today had been strange but useful. The image of the gloomy young man who turned out to be a young lady came to mind. Despite her cold demeanor and stern character, Jin felt that Lyra was a kind-hearted person. He hoped that she would be all right and that their paths might cross again. Jin called Rich, reminding him that it was time to go home. Several months had passed since Rich woke up after his illness. At first, his steps were uncertain, but with each passing day, he grew stronger and more confident. During this time, Jin had learned a lot and acquired new skills. He often visited farmers to learn how to properly care for livestock and how to make cheese himself. Then he went into the forest where he helped carpenters and learned their craft, trying to understand the fundamentals of their skill. Also, the smell of medicinal herbs was bothering him more and more, so he decided to build a small laboratory next to his house. Jin wanted to get settled as comfortably as possible before winter and gather enough materials while the weather permitted. He had recently bought a cork oak sapling and decided to plant it near his house. After adding some growth powder, he watched in surprise as the plant quickly grew tall and strong. He had used this powder on grapevines before, but he was still amazed by its power. Jin thought this tree would be an excellent source of material in the future. After that, he decided to go shopping in Kanem as he had accumulated a lot of loot in his storage. Upon arriving in Kanem, Jin realized that constantly renting a hotel room was becoming too much of a hassle. He found himself thinking more and more that it was time to rent his own house. Walking down the street, he noticed a handkerchief on the ground and irritably noted that he was once again seeing the pink-haired girl from the Adventurers Guild, who seemed to be following him. It seemed to him that she was angry with him for cooperating with the Merchant Guild. Jin realized it would now look suspicious if he started buying things to furnish a house, as he was officially living in a hotel. He decided it would be better to just rent a place and stop hiding. One of the local men showed him a house, explaining that the building was new, which was why the price was low. Plus, according to the owner, the area was considered safe. Jin noted to himself that in this world, unlike his own, older houses were valued more because previous owners had already furnished them and fixed all the flaws. The new house wasn't so perfect after all. The fittings were poor, there were gaps in the walls, and he could feel a draft. Jin thought with slight irony that this was definitely not Japan, where everything was fitted to the millimeter. Nevertheless, he decided that this option would work. Now he would have a place where he could use his teleportation spell without worry. However, before moving in completely, he decided to expand his knowledge a bit and learn some useful things about local materials. Soon, he informed the owner that he agreed to the deal. After that, Jin spent several days helping carpenters, plasterers, and farmers, continuing to improve his skills. He participated in making cheese, learned to make herbal tinctures, and even helped repair buildings. All this time, Amila, the same pink-haired girl, watched him, seemingly unwilling to give up. As Jin walked down the street, he noticed that the air had become noticeably colder and felt winter approaching. Just then, Amila appeared nearby. She shyly mentioned that she didn't have enough change. Then she suddenly asked if he was planning to go to the demonic forest, as it becomes especially dangerous there when the cold weather sets in. Jin calmly replied that he was aware of all the risks. Amila, looking at him with concern, asked him not to overdo it and reminded him that life is much more important than money. Jin assured her that he wasn't forcing himself into anything and had no intention of taking unnecessary risks. Amila wanted to add something but suddenly stumbled and fell. Jin sighed, thinking that it seemed she would never tire of chasing him. Outside the city, he noticed a familiar figure and tensed up internally. Dean, Amila's older brother, stood before him. Jin froze in place, collecting his thoughts, and politely apologized, trying to speak calmly and reservedly. Dean noticed Jin and, slightly embarrassed, admitted his fault. He said he understood he was meddling in something that wasn't his business, but he still wanted to discuss a matter. Dean informed him that Jin's name was being mentioned more and more frequently at the Adventurers Guild, with people asking if he planned to return there. Dean explained that the reason was that Kaina, their mutual acquaintance, was constantly receiving reprimands from her superiors. Jin was surprised and asked what Kaina had to do with it. Dean then explained that the girl was being accused of the trade guild luring away a promising adventurer, meaning Jin himself. Hearing this, Jin remarked that the reason was likely not just him, but also Dean's sister. Dean nodded and admitted he understood his culpability. He apologized for everything that had happened, saying he regretted the situation. Jin, after a moment's thought, decided that he really should go to the guild and clarify the situation, even though it bothered him. He agreed, but set one condition. Jin asked Dean to keep his sister away from him. Jin said he didn't want the girl following him around, constantly appearing in front of him and trying to strike up conversations. Dean was surprised but promised he would try to fulfill the request. Then, with a slight smile, he remarked that his sister, in his opinion, was quite cute and asked if Jin was sure about his decision. Jin mentally rolled his eyes, noting that Dean clearly saw his sister through rose-tinted glasses and seemed to suffer from a mild sister complex. He calmly replied that he considered Amila a girl with a terrible personality and that she was completely not his type. Dean chuckled and asked what kind of girls Jin liked in general. Jin pondered this, mentally noting that if he could choose, he would prefer someone completely opposite to his sister. He thought he preferred girls who didn't overdo makeup or try to flaunt their femininity. Then he admitted he might have been a bit hasty, as such an extreme could resemble Lyra's masculinity, which wasn't quite right either. Jin concluded that he didn't like extremes and also disapproved of feminists. To change the subject, Dean offered to show him a place where rare herbs grew. He said he wanted to make amends this way. Jin immediately got interested and asked what kind of plants they were. He noted mentally that he needed to gather herbs anyway, so the offer came at a perfect time. He agreed, and they set off together. During their walk, Jin noted that Dean was actually a decent guy, aside from his strange attitude towards his sister. Soon, Dean showed him a plant called kinka. He explained that he considered this herb completely useless, as it was only used to enhance the aroma of expensive alcoholic beverages. Jin brought the herb to his face and noted its earthy, herbaceous scent, wondering how anyone could drink such a beverage. Dean laughed and replied that the wealthy always had their quirks. Then he suggested they catch a couple of rabbits for lunch. Jin agreed, thinking he couldn't just teleport home for lunch since he wasn't alone. He also realized he couldn't use his storage, so he agreed to eat there. While hunting, he noticed Dean's movements were precise and efficient, and he noted that hunting with him was a valuable experience. Dean, in turn, said it was funny to hear that from someone who calmly hunted bears. Jin chuckled and admitted he just relied on brute force. Dean was surprised but didn't argue. In his mind, Jin noted that he was well aware of his fragile body and small stature, but he firmly promised himself that he would definitely become stronger and taller. At that moment, they heard a slight rustle and Lyra appeared from behind the trees. She politely apologized, saying she might have startled them. Jin immediately became wary and mentally noted that it was Lyra, not Leon, in front of him. He asked what she was doing there. Lyra calmly replied that she had been hunting bears but had entered this area looking for water. Jin thought that wasn't what he should be asking because if she was in hiding, she probably wouldn't talk about it in Dean's presence. He decided not to call her by name to avoid giving her away. Dean noticed they seemed to know each other and Jin confirmed it but without going into detail. Lyra introduced herself as Ash, and Dean politely introduced himself in return. Jin mentally exhaled, relieved that he hadn't blurted out her real name and given her away. Lyra thanked him for his past help and mentioned she hadn't paid for the potion he gave her. Jin smiled and replied that it was fine, as he hadn't realized how much she was suffering either. Lyra was about to add something, but Dean interrupted them, suggesting they eat. He said that bear hunting brought in good money, and paying for her potion wouldn't be a problem. Lyra confessed that she was currently living in a place where housing was too expensive, and 1 gold coin a day was an excessive price. Dean was surprised and asked what kind of inn it was. Lyra replied that it only had a bed and a desk. Dean was outraged, calling it insane, and couldn't understand how she agreed to live in such conditions. She explained that the pink-haired receptionist from the guild recommended the place to her. Hearing this, Jin frowned inwardly, realizing she was talking about Amila. Dean quickly defended his sister, saying she was probably just overworked and didn't think about the consequences. He added that it wasn't her fault and blamed the inn itself for everything. Jin gritted his teeth internally and thought that hearing such words was unpleasant. He said with slight irritation that the relationship between Dean and his sister seemed strange, even a little frightening. He noted that Dean seemed to completely shut off his logic when it came to Amila. Dean calmly replied that he didn't do it for no reason, as his sister tried to help everyone around her, did everything possible for others, and that's why he considered her truly kind and sweet. Lyra, who had been observing their conversation, remarked that she now understood who they were talking about earlier and clarified that the girl was Dean's own sister. He immediately became flustered, his voice uncertain, and he asked Lyra not to look at him with such an expression. Lyra, gathering her thoughts, said she wasn't sure if they would believe her, but there was a spirit near Amila. She added that a mark of this spirit's influence was visible on Dean's own head. Jin became alert and mentally repeated the word mark, trying to understand what she meant. Dean was surprised and said he was hearing about this for the first time. He added that it was impossible to see the mark of powerful spirits with an ordinary gaze. At that moment, a flower could indeed be seen gently swaying on his head. Jin barely suppressed a laugh and mentally told himself not to take it too seriously, as upon closer inspection, the flower looked more artificial. He approached and politely asked for permission to look closer. Then, he carefully plucked the flower from Dean's head, apologizing for his action. Lyra watched intently and quietly said that it wasn't just an ornament but something like a controlling spirit. She noted that the spirit's influence abruptly ceased, causing Dean to lose consciousness. After that, she surprisingly mentioned that Jin could not only see spirits but also touch them. Jin confirmed that he could do so if he wished. He noted to himself that he usually only saw his own spirit, Rich, so such instances didn't significantly impact his daily life. He recalled that the most powerful spirits, sometimes called gods, could only be seen when they themselves desired it. Lyra said she had never met anyone with such abilities before. She admitted that Jin's level could be compared to her father's capabilities. Jin asked if this was a manifestation of their family's lineage. Lyra nodded and explained that in their family, only she and her father could see spirits. She clarified that she couldn't touch them, so she asked Jin to be careful. She emphasized that such an ability was highly valued and could attract unwanted attention. Jin nodded, saying he understood. Then, with a cold calculation, he remarked that perhaps he should silence Dean to avoid unnecessary rumors. He jokingly added in his thoughts that if Dean's body were left there, a bear would quickly take care of everything. He then chuckled to himself, noting that he was, of course, just kidding. He remembered that he hadn't said anything when he plucked the flower, and Dean might not have even realized what happened. After a short pause, Jin said that Dean now knew about his ability to see spirits, but it shouldn't cause any major problems. Lyra looked at him with concern and said that Jin had saved her life, which meant Dean, his companion, was also a friend and trustworthy. Jin calmly replied that he had actually only seen him twice and couldn't call them friends. Lyra frowned and remarked that if they left Dean unattended, wild animals might attack him. Jin chuckled inwardly, realizing she seemed to be following the same naive path as before. She said she felt responsible for what happened and suggested they just wait and see how things unfolded before making a decision. Jin noted to himself that Lyra was clearly the type of person who tended to attract misfortune and unlucky events. Lyra, after a moment of silence, decided to change the subject. She said that since they were talking about spirits, she wanted to know if Jin could see the spirit attached to her. Jin replied that he would check. He focused, and soon his gaze fell on a small bird sitting nearby. Jin involuntarily widened his eyes and mentally exclaimed that he saw this bird pecking Lyra right in the face. Jin looked at Lyra intently and asked with a slight tremor in his voice if the spirit's presence caused her pain. Lyra replied calmly, as if accustomed to it, that she experienced a constant dull ache that she had long learned to live with. Jin's mind flashed with astonishment. How could one call a pain dull when it seemingly never subsided for a moment? His attention was suddenly drawn to a strange, glowing band wrapped around the spirit's neck. It resembled a magical collar. Using his appraisal ability, Jin received a description. The spirit named Lu was once captured by Adelheid Laratinan to make Lyra Adelheid more masculine. Jin mentally scoffed at such an absurd outcome, believing that such an application of magic bordered on madness. Lyra, seemingly oblivious to his confusion, said that her father had bound this spirit to her when she was only 7 years old. Jin barely managed to hide his surprise, wondering how she had endured all of that for so long. He said he didn't understand why her father would do such a thing. Lyra replied without hesitation that it was necessary to raise her into a worthy heir for their family line. Jin frowned and pointed out that, as far as he knew, she had a younger brother. Lyra confirmed this was true and explained that one day her father, after getting heavily drunk, woke up next to an unfamiliar woman. Sometime later, that woman brought a baby directly to their house. A sarcastic thought crossed Jin's mind. It seemed that woman decided to work as a courier, delivering the child so casually. Lyra, meanwhile, calmly continued. She said that fortunately in her country, the firstborn is considered the heir, regardless of gender. However, her family had been involved in military affairs for generations, and her father believed his daughter needed to be strong. That's why he attached a spirit to her, so that during training, her gender wouldn't be an obstacle. Jin said doubtfully that he could understand if the spirit enhanced physical strength or stamina, but attempting to impose the concept of masculinity seemed strange and even absurd. Lyra looked a bit confused and asked what he meant by masculinity. A realization immediately dawned on Jin. She likely had no idea about the true purpose for which the spirit was bound to her. He collected his thoughts and calmly but firmly stated that while it was impolite to interfere in family matters, she needed to get rid of this spirit as soon as possible. He added that, by the looks of it, even the spirit itself was quite fed up with the situation. Lyra lowered her gaze and said that the spirit was supposed to have been removed 2 years ago, but by then, her father was no longer in a state to do so. After a short pause, she timidly asked Jin if he could try to free the spirit. Jin pondered this, noting mentally that he wasn't sure if he could handle that collar. He then said he wasn't sure if it would work, but suggested they try once they returned to the city. Lyra gratefully agreed, saying that even if it didn't work out, she would still want to thank him. Jin replied that there was no need for thanks, as she had already spent money on expensive lodging, and asked what she planned to do if she had to move. Lyra calmly stated she would continue hunting bears. A thought flashed through Jin's mind. He had completely forgotten that this was precisely why she had come here. At that moment, Dean woke up. With a guilty expression, he said he was sorry as he had spoiled his sister too much. Lyra gently replied that he wasn't to blame, as he had fallen under the influence of the spirit of obsession and couldn't help himself. She added that there had already been men in the guild who also bore the spirit's mark. Some of them only had one petal appear, but the longer they were near Amila, the more petals grew and the stronger the influence became. Jin mentally noted that he wouldn't have been able to calmly watch such a sight without showing emotion. Dean looked up and apologized to Jin, saying he felt guilty towards him as well. Jin calmly responded that there was no need for apologies, as nothing serious had happened and it hadn't affected him. Dean sighed and said that if the guild found out about all this, there would be a real commotion. He added that they needed to consult with Kaina and take Amila to the spirit branch, where they could address her condition and remove the spirit's influence. Jin's thoughts were fixated on the mention of the spirit branch. He remembered seeing such a place during a tour and realized that was exactly what they were talking about. A picture of a temple where spirits gathered flashed in his mind, and he now understood that similar places existed in almost every city. though their size and influence might vary. This place serves to gather spirits and release them when necessary. Jin decided not to interfere with the conversation and remained silent, believing he knew too little to comment. Dean announced that he needed to return to the city to properly prepare for his next task. He advised Lyra, if she planned to hunt bears, to use carriers. Jin asked who the carriers were. Lyra explained that they were people who transported adventurers' prey. Dean said he had already arranged everything and handed them a note with the meeting place and time. Jin thanked him. Dean added that Jin shouldn't worry, as he wouldn't tell anyone about Jin's ability to see and touch spirits. Jin realized that Dean had, after all, figured out his gift. Later, they were surrounded by wolves. Lyra noted that Jin's fighting style was characterized by speed and efficiency. In his thoughts, Jin decided he should thank her. He was captivated by her smooth, calm, and powerful movements. They looked refined yet potent, becoming a perfect example to emulate. Using his natural talent for martial arts, he realized he was capable of copying such techniques. Soon, the voices of two men were heard nearby. They indignantly said that this was too much and how they would transport the prey now, as the cart didn't belong to them. The men were afraid that if it broke, there would be problems, and asked Jin and Lyra not to overload the cart and to carry some of the load themselves. When it was all over, Jin remarked with relief that it was a good thing they hadn't hunted bears. Lyra replied that wolves paid less, but the amount they got was sufficient, and apologized for getting him involved. Jin said there was no need for apologies and asked where they planned to free the spirit. Lyra said she might be unconscious longer than Dean and suggested performing the ritual at the inn. Jin noted that if she were laid up for several days, it would be inconvenient, and asked where her butler had gone. Lyra replied that they were supposed to meet in Canum, but she didn't know exactly when he would arrive. Jin thought to himself that if she had a butler, she probably wouldn't be spending so much money on a hotel. He suggested they go to his place if she didn't mind. Lyra agreed and, looking around, commented that he had good taste. Jin felt satisfied, thinking his renovation efforts weren't in vain. He sniffed his clothes and grimaced, catching an unpleasant scent of wolf. After that, he offered Lyra a hot bath. She politely accepted, and he promised to get everything ready. Jin noted mentally that there was a public bathhouse with a steam room nearby, but according to his appraisal skill, it had serious hygiene issues. So he decided to use the old bathtub, which was originally meant for laundry, even though he hadn't used it himself yet. Once everything was prepared, he told her the restroom was next door and that he would go upstairs. Lyra thanked him. Jin thought it would be a good idea to teleport home to change clothes and prepare the guest bed on the second floor. He also noted that he had been meaning to install a separate bathtub for a while. Later, when everything was ready, Jin suggested they begin the ritual. Lyra nodded and asked him to take care of her. A thought flashed through Jin's mind, feeling as if the spirit inside her resembled a small bird that couldn't stop moving. He focused and managed to remove the magic collar, freeing the spirit. After that, he apologized to Lyra, but she had already lost consciousness. Jin addressed the freed spirit, asking it not to torment the girl anymore. He told it that it had fulfilled its purpose and could now rest. A wave of relief washed over Jin, thinking that everything had gone smoothly. He realized he didn't know when Lyra would wake up and decided she might have to stay with him for a while. He thought it might be a good idea to buy furniture for the third floor. Jin went to the market, tidied up the house, and returned home. He apologized to Rich for appearing less frequently. The thought that Lyra still hadn't woken up worried him. Suddenly, he heard Miss Toe's voice calling his name. Jin was surprised to see Miss Toe, Ludier, and Paula, and said he was happy to see them, as it had been a long time. He asked what brought them there. Ludier explained that they had a request for him. Pal mentioned that several spirits had escaped to this location, and asked Jin to give them names. Miss Toe added that his sister was using too much magic and doing so recklessly. Apparently, this was because she still couldn't see spirits. Jin, with a hint of weariness, said she was obsessed and impulsive, but would probably get tired of it in a year and calm down. Miss Toe stated that the spirits had weakened and were almost gone, and Namina seemed to have given up, even though she had been getting stronger each time. Jin was surprised and asked her name again, as if recalling something important. His thoughts were filled with unease as he watched the strange ball of light. He felt a sense of unease and suspicion that Miss Toe wasn't stopping this ball on purpose because it benefited her. He hadn't liked the glow from the start, and now he was convinced his intuition hadn't failed him. Miss To explained that Jin's sister would only be able to see spirits after Namina regained her strength. However, she expressed concern that by then, Namina would have already dominated all the surrounding spirits. Ludier added that he understood Jin's reluctance to interfere but noted that the spirits had become too noisy and restless. Jin thought this was especially alarming, considering Ludier was responsible for silence. Pal said they couldn't restrict the actions of heroes or directly guide them, but if things continued this way, the consequences would affect many people. Jin became interested and asked what exactly this effect was. Miss To suggested he see the spirits with his own eyes and told him to look out the window. Jin was surprised, realizing that the spirits were indeed outside. He looked out and gasped, seeing how many spirits surrounded their house. Surprise and a slight horror flashed through his mind. He had lived peacefully all this time, unaware of the enormous number of spirits around him. Jin realized that it was probably a good thing he hadn't seen them before, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to live normally. Miss To explained that his sister's dominance extended to all nearby spirits, which is why they instinctively gravitated towards someone with the skill of freedom. Jin asked what he should do in such a situation. Pal replied that it was simple, he just needed to give the spirits names and then the dominance would dissipate. Ludier added that if the power of freedom won, or if Jin's connection to the spirits was deeper than his sister's influence, the spirits would definitively choose his side. Miss To advised him to bond with the spirits first, and then they would surely choose him. Jin, confused, said that naming so many spirits was almost impossible. Ludier responded that there was no need to overcomplicate it, using numbers or simple designations would suffice. If a name wasn't liked, it could always be changed later. Pal supported him, saying there was no need to worry, because if a spirit liked a person, it could accept a new name from them on its own. Jin pondered this, admitting it was all a bit confusing. He realized that everything now depended not on his sister, but on himself. He was the one who needed to appeal to the spirits to establish a connection with them. Ludier explained that a named spirit grants its master a part of its power, so if Jin found a strong and reliable spirit, he should give it a unique name, not just a number. Jin understood the meaning of these words and agreed. Miss To suggested they go outside and begin the naming process. She reminded him that spirits were forbidden from entering the house without Jin's permission, so they had to do it outdoors. She clapped her hands and ordered the spirits to line up so everything would be organized. Jin mentally noted that he wouldn't have a peaceful life until he completed this procedure. He didn't know how far he could get before his sister learned to see spirits, but he decided to see it through. Jin began naming the spirits, assigning names in order of colors and numbers. First, he named the red first, then the green first, then the yellow first, the red second, and the blue first. 2 hours passed. Jin wearily uttered the name Yellow 52nd and exhaled, deciding to take a break. He felt completely exhausted and decided to check on Ash. Teleporting, he thought with relief that his escape had been successful. Miss To appeared beside him and asked who Ash was. Jin was surprised she had followed him and explained that he had freed Ash from a spirit. He said that Ash still hadn't come to and hadn't woken up after the ritual. Miss To said with a slight smirk that it was a real nightmare for a girl. Jin's mind was clear and attentive as he realized that Miss To had determined at first glance that the person before them was a girl. He hadn't expected such an observation as he himself had no intention of touching her or violating her boundaries. He calmly explained this, trying to show that his intentions were pure. Miss To replied that she wasn't suspecting him of impropriety at all. Then she used magic, creating a soft glow that enveloped the girl's body. After that, Miss To said that the girl wouldn't have to worry about things like needing to wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Jin mentally understood why she had done that. He thanked Miss To for her thoughtfulness, admitting that he hadn't thought of it himself. She replied with a slight smile that no thanks were needed and added that the girl would likely only wake up the day after tomorrow. After that, she asked what the name of the little one next to them was. Jin looked at the creature and, using his appraisal ability, realized its current name was Lu. Miss To explained that the previous contract had been terminated, and now Jin could give the being a new name. He was surprised, not immediately understanding how it worked, but Miss To nodded and said that the little one itself wanted him to give it a name. Jin pondered. He noticed the creature's soft, fluffy feathers. The thought of naming it Fluffy crossed his mind, but he realized that was too simple. His gaze settled on the bright blue feathers, and he thought the name should reflect that color. After a brief moment of thought, he uttered the name as. Miss Toe chuckled softly and said the spirit seemed pleased. Jin mentally noted that Az was short for the Italian word azzurro, meaning blue, and he was glad his new companion liked the chosen name. Then Jin asked if Az would stay with Ash. He thought that Ash and this spirit had been bound by contract for a long time, and the girl might get lonely if the bird disappeared. Miss Toe suggested he return and continue naming the spirits to finish what he started. Jin agreed, deciding it was time to go back. He used the teleport and was surprised to see that Kadar and Ish had also arrived. Kadar thanked him for his help, and Jin, without wasting any time, continued naming the spirits, organizing them by color, red, then blue, and so on. Ludir warned that they might have to repeat everything in about a month if the number of spirits increased. Jin, exhaling tiredly, said that it was finally over. Jin wanted to use light magic, but Ludir tried to stop him. The orb glowed especially brightly, blinding everyone present. Jin was startled by the suddenness, squeezing his eyes shut. Miss Toe just gasped in surprise, astonished by the intensity of the radiance. Jin irritably noted that the orb was so bright it was visible even through his closed eyelids. Ludir calmly replied that he had warned him not to rush. He explained that he had mixed light with darkness to slightly weaken the emission and make it safe. When Jin opened his eyes, he was surprised by what was happening. Miss Toe said that even though these spirits were tiny, there were many light spirits among them. Ish added that they had gathered together to transfer their power to Jin, which was why such a result appeared. Pal seriously warned that this was quite dangerous. She said that when interacting with spirits, one must clearly visualize each image and act with concentration, otherwise something unpredictable could happen. Jin thought that the orb of light had never behaved so strangely before. He remembered Miss Toe talking about the importance of visualizing an image when using magic. He decided that all of this could be thought about later, and that it was time for dinner now. Jin looked around and asked if anyone wanted anything to eat. Miss Toe replied that she wanted honey. Ludir asked for wine, Pal for bread, Kadar for herbal tea, and Ish said he needed salt. Jin mentally noted how varied the spirits' tastes were. He tried the pork soup and thought the dish turned out great. At the same time, he watched with interest as Ish ate salt almost by the handful. He felt a little uneasy because it looked strange, but he decided that if Ish was confident, then everything was fine. Then Jin said aloud that it seemed spirits could indeed eat, realizing that their nature was closer to living beings than he had previously thought. Miss Toe calmly explained that only strong spirits with a human-like form could taste food, though even they didn't experience it the same way humans did. She added that other spirits nourished themselves in different ways, depending on their natural attributes and essence. Some of them drew energy from morning or evening dew, others fed on campfire flames or the warmth of a fireplace, and some absorbed the scent of flowers or other natural sources of power. At this moment, Rich approached Jin, and he asked him to wait so he could finish his meal in peace. Ludir looked closely at the wolf and said in surprise that before them was Rich, the wolf of darkness and ice, who had once been his teacher. He asked Jin what his plans were for this creature. Miss Toe chuckled lightly and said that the new Rich looked unusually cute. At the same time, she admitted that spirits could sometimes be suspicious and wary, so she apologized for their distrust. Kadar, standing nearby, reminded them that before losing his power, Rich was a deity capable of shaking the atmosphere and destroying the earth. He listened to no one's advice and acted solely on his own will, destroying everything that stood in his way. Hearing this, Jin remarked with admiration that Rich resembled a true alpha dog, a strong and proud leader. Miss Toe was surprised by the word and asked about its meaning. Jin calmly explained that an alpha is the leader of the pack, the most important and strongest, the one who leads the others. He said that dogs always follow their leader, and if anyone disobeys, the alpha becomes ruthless and shows its strength. Such a leader demands complete obedience, eats first, and is above all rules. Kadar and Miss Toe exchanged glances, realizing that Rich wasn't just a wolf, but a spirit embodied in that form. Jin asked if there was any difference between a spirit and a wolf, since both possess an animal nature. Kadar explained that some spirits follow their inner nature and instincts, while others are capable of suppressing them. He recalled that Rich used to be able to speak and was highly intelligent, so he warned Jin to be careful. Jin pondered this and realized that he and Rich hadn't spoken even once yet. it seemed Rich was currently relying more on instinct than reason. However, despite his former grandeur, the spirit's current form looked surprisingly cute and calm. Jin decided he would figure out what to do when Rich spoke again and thanked everyone for their concern and advice. Miss To, with slight anxiety, asked him to be careful, emphasizing that he was very important to her. Jin mentally called her a little devil and thought she should choose her words more carefully. After that, Miss To thanked him for his work and said she hoped for continued cooperation with the spirits. Jin nodded tiredly and replied that he understood everything. Ludir respectfully stated that a noble lone wolf stood before him. Jin pondered this expression, deciding that perhaps Rich truly was lonely and not just pretending. He decided it was time to rest and take a bath before bed. Later, Jin arrived in a small pottery town to commission a bathtub. He also decided to buy new dishes on his way back. There, he was met by a man named Malcolm, who introduced himself and said he had heard about Jin's idea for a new product. Jin replied that it wasn't really an idea so much as just a regular bathtub. Malcolm animatedly noted that he had recently received an order for several similar bathtubs from aristocrats in a neighboring country, calling it an amazing coincidence. Jin inwardly tensed upon hearing the mention of another country and thought he knew exactly who might have placed that order. Malcolm continued the conversation, explaining that he had already started developing a prototype bathtub with legs. He admitted it was his first time taking on such a project, but he found it interesting and inspiring. He asked Jin to help with the development to improve the quality and form of the product. Jin agreed, though he mentally noted that if they could complete this work, everything would be fine. He was glad he had the ability to sever ties, which allowed him to conceal his origins. However, he knew it was like walking on thin ice where the slightest mistake could expose him. Later, returning home, Jin saw that Lyra had finally woken up. He approached her and asked how she was feeling. Lyra thanked him for his concern and said she felt a slight pain in her back. Jin replied that it was no surprise, as she had been asleep for quite a while. Lyra asked exactly how much time had passed, noting that it was unclear whether it was morning or evening outside the window. Jin informed her that 3 days had passed. Lyra was surprised and apologized for the trouble, but Jin reassured her, saying he had simply put her to sleep. He pointed to the bird and added that he had given it a new name while Lyra was resting. Lyra asked what name he had chosen, and Jin replied that he had named it as. She nodded approvingly and said it was a good name, and if the spirit accepted it, it meant it was truly attached to Jin and felt affection for him. Jin was mentally struck by how drastically her appearance had changed. Once her gloomy expression disappeared, she transformed into a true beauty. He barely managed to hide his surprise, but out loud, he only said that Az seemed very attached to her now. Lyra was surprised and asked if that was true. Jin inwardly noted that to others, she looked more like a handsome guy than a girl. He reminded himself not to stare too long at people like her, or his sister, or the pink-haired girl, otherwise he wouldn't be able to get rid of them later. Jin, with slight bewilderment, asked if Lyra was always so trusting and open in her interactions with others. Lyra calmly replied that she saw no need to fear Master Jin, as she perceived no threat from him. Jin quickly assured her that there was indeed no danger here and she could feel completely safe, but he still noted that the girl should be more careful in the future. He assumed she was probably hungry and decided to bring her some soup so she could eat and regain her strength. Lyra asked if she could stay here for the night, to which Jin confidently said that of course she could, as it was already night outside and it would be unsafe to leave. Lyra thanked him and apologized for the trouble. Jin wished her a speedy recovery and reminded her that she would later need to compensate him for the cost of her stay. Lyra seriously replied that she would definitely repay Master Jin for his help. Jin mentally noted that he had meant something entirely different and hadn't expected such a literal interpretation. The next morning at the guild, Lyra surprisingly called out Not's name when she spotted him. Not slightly concerned, asked if everything was all right with Master Ash. Jin privately noted that while spirits could sometimes be seen around certain people, he had never encountered a man with flowers on his head before. Dean, noticing their arrival, addressed them, expressing his displeasure that they had finally shown up. Jin calmly greeted him. Dean offered to buy him a drink as an apology for the inconvenience and then turned his attention to Not, saying he didn't think they had met before. Not introduced himself, explaining that he had been a butler several years ago and was now an adventurer. He added that he had been associated with Master Ash for a long time and had decided to continue serving him. Dean brushed off the details, saying it didn't matter if there were 2 or 3 of them, and moved on to talk about his younger sister, Amilla. Jin thought that Dean was probably also one of those people spirits liked. Dean recounted that when he took his sister to the spirit branch to get rid of a spirit, many guild members fainted, but now everything was back to normal. He asked them not to spread word about the incident, otherwise the guild's reputation would suffer. Amilla would now have to start from the lowest rank until she improved her character, otherwise she wouldn't be able to work at the reception desk. Jin noted to himself that since no one was immune to the spirit's antics, if it was done without malicious intent, no one would judge the girl too harshly. Lyra added that the values of spirits differed from those of humans, and what they considered harmless pranks could become a real disaster for people. However, this time, thanks to Mr. Dean's intervention and the fact that Amilla was his relative, she was treated quite leniently. Dean agreed with her words. Jin mentally noted that Ash wasn't usually one for formalities, and if Dean hadn't intervened, many adventurers might have thought the pink-haired girl had gotten away with it. He also observed that even though she seemed a bit strange, her mind worked perfectly. Dean reminded them that all extra expenses would be covered and advised Jin to see the secretary later. He also mentioned that he was now living in an inn to avoid the temptation of spoiling his sister again, and suggested Jin stay there too, assuring him it was a good place. Not replied that he and Master Ash would still prefer to rent a house, but asked if they could temporarily rent 2 rooms at that inn for a short period. Dean agreed without hesitation. Jin thought that drinking seemed to be allowed from age 15 here, though he still felt a little uneasy. He noted that getting rid of his old mentality was proving quite difficult. Dean then suggested that Jin spend the day with a mid-level adventurer to help him fill in some gaps in his experience. He explained that this person wasn't particularly strong but was very reliable when it came to guild assignments. Jin agreed that it could be useful. Dean clarified that he would introduce him tomorrow at the same time, adding that he had something else to say. He advised them not to get into trouble because they were both quite unusual guys. He specifically addressed Ash, asking him to stop frowning so much. Dean noted that he couldn't fully agree with the remark, even though he often looked gloomy. Dean chuckled and said that they both had attractive faces, and therefore, the strangest individuals would undoubtedly be drawn to them. Dean greeted his companion, Rich, first thing in the morning and was surprised that it had started snowing. He noted that winter had truly arrived, and at that moment, a sense of silence and cold calm filled the air. After breakfasting on slightly tart plum jam and fresh cheese, he remarked that their delicious combination was unexpectedly pleasant. Dean thought that winter had truly come and recalled the last time he experienced it in the mountains, where everything was covered in snow and the air was crystal clear. He reminded himself that Dean was going to introduce him to the adventurer he had mentioned earlier today, and he decided to prepare thoroughly. Soon, Lyra entered the room and politely addressed him as Sir Jean. Jean greeted her and Noth. Lyra, a little embarrassed, said that she wanted to clarify the situation regarding yesterday's incident and the payment for the potion. Jean sighed slightly and replied that he wasn't demanding immediate compensation, as such matters could be settled later. However, Lyra tried to object, but Jean mentally noted that there seemed to be no changing her stubbornness. He gently suggested they revisit the conversation when her life became more stable, for example, after she found a home and settled in. Lyra calmly agreed to this decision. At that moment, Dean approached them and called Jean over to introduce him to a new person. He introduced him to Letzi, adding that this was the experienced adventurer he had mentioned earlier. Jean politely greeted him and said he was pleased to meet him. Letzi responded with a brief greeting and added that he didn't like excessive formalities. Jean nodded understandingly. He thought to himself that this was the reliable adventurer Dean had spoken about. But Letzi immediately turned to Dean with a sneer, noting that he hadn't mentioned how attractive Jean's face was and that women wouldn't be able to take their eyes off him. He added that he wasn't sure if everything would be calm under such circumstances. Jean mentally chuckled as he had heard every word perfectly, even though Letzi clearly wasn't shy about speaking aloud. Dean, slightly annoyed, warned him not to mess anything up, as there had already been problems with him. Letzi grumbled discontentedly that one silver-haired guy wasn't enough, and now he had another handsome partner, as if Dean deliberately chose such companions. Jin thought that he couldn't help his appearance, as his face was a blend of three gods' visages, and that wasn't his fault. He calmly asked Letzi if they were ready to go. Letzi replied that it was time to leave and asked if they should handle the request in the standard way. Dean confirmed that it was business as usual. When Jin asked if Letzi had an inferiority complex about his looks, Dean just shrugged, saying he didn't know himself. Jin mentally noted that, no matter what, his first request for an experienced adventurer's escort had finally been granted. Letzi began explaining the details of their assignment. He said that their main goal for the day was hunting animals, as fur and meat were especially in demand this time of year. Letzi explained that rabbits were the best to hunt because they were easy to find and sold well. Bears were also in demand among wealthy people, but only large ones, while small ones were useless. Therefore, in his opinion, it wasn't worth wasting energy on small bears, and it was better to focus on hunting rabbits. He added that they should first check the meat prices on the bulletin board. Letzi noted that horned animals usually had tough meat, making it difficult to sell, but their fur was beautiful and valuable. He mentioned that bear pelt prices had recently dropped, so they weren't the most profitable target. Jin mentally observed that this was very similar to the work he and Ash used to do. Letzi pointed to tracks in the snow and said that by how the grass was flattened and the paw prints were made, they could determine the direction the prey had gone. He explained that if they observed carefully, they could distinguish between monster tracks and those of a regular animal. Jin thought admiringly that Letzi was truly a professional. Letzi continued, explaining that a rabbit's hind legs were straight and its front legs were angled, and the hind legs left larger prints. When Jin pointed out other tracks, Letzi clarified that the ones going in a straight line were left by a fox. He added that it was difficult to tell if it was a regular fox or a demon. Letzi speculated that the rabbit they were hunting might be horned. Jin was surprised and asked how he came to that conclusion. Letzi explained that claw marks were visible in the snow, and if a fox was chasing prey, it was likely a demon itself. Jin admired his keen observation skills and thought that he himself had acted much more crudely, simply using magic search and sword attacks. He began to wonder if he had made too many mistakes while with Dean. Letzi said that ordinary rabbits and foxes could be hunted with a short bow, but such arrows wouldn't penetrate monsters. He drew the bowstring and killed a rabbit with a precise shot. Afterward, Letzi smiled and remarked that hunting monsters was much more fun because they attacked without making you wait. Watching this, Jin thought it was really cool and, with genuine interest, asked Letzi to show him how to properly hunt foxes. Letzi gave a short nod, confirming what he said, and soon they completed the transaction. Later, a woman approached him and thanked him for the goods, noting that the quality was, as always, excellent. Letzi, without losing his confidence, asked if a small bonus should be added to the reward, as the work had been done to the highest standard. Jin, observing from the side, noted to himself that Letzi possessed not only experience but also good communication skills. Later, they sat together at a table, celebrating the successful completion of the task, raising their glasses to a job well done. Jin thanked Letzi for the lesson today. Letzi chuckled and said that Jin was a strange guy because his movements felt overly dramatic and precise. He noted that Jin's style somewhat resembled Dean's fighting manner, but with his slender hands, a style similar to Letzi's own would suit him better. Dean waved his hand and suggested they ignore the teasing, adding that it was better to just drink and enjoy the evening, as he was treating today. Jin was slightly flustered but still thanked him and joined the feast. Upon returning home, he felt a surge of energy and immediately began exercising. Jin started doing push-ups, mentally promising himself to become stronger and prove that he was capable of more. He firmly decided that from this day on, he would stick to a protein diet and train his muscles daily. In the morning, he approached Malcolm, asking if the bathtub he was making was ready. Malcolm had just finished the work and said that Jin had arrived just in time. Jin admired the result with enthusiasm and thanked the craftsman for his work. Malcolm asked how he planned to transport the tub. Jin was flustered, realizing he had forgotten about that. He mentally reminded himself that he wanted to use his storage, but he couldn't do it in front of other people to avoid suspicion. Malcolm offered to order a cart, but Jin hastily refused, assuring him that everything was already arranged. Malcolm nodded and told him to wait a bit while he carefully packed everything. After that, Jin thanked him for the help and headed home. He used his storage and noted to himself how convenient and practical this ability was in everyday life. When the tub was installed, he looked at the result with satisfaction and said that everything turned out perfectly. Just then, he heard a voice and turned around to see Lyra standing at the entrance. She politely apologized for disturbing him. Jin asked what brought her there, and Lyra said she came to tell him about her move. He was surprised and asked with interest if she had found a new home and where it was located. Lyra replied that her new home was right here, nearby. Jin mentally noted that it was indeed close and congratulated her on the move with a smile. Lyra shyly mentioned that it might all be a bit strange. Jin became wary, and she explained that Not had found the house for her, even though she hadn't told him where Jin lived. Jin was surprised and suggested it was just a coincidence. But Lyra wasn't so sure, saying it might be because Not noticed her mood improved after talking to Jin. Jin was mentally surprised, not understanding when that had happened. He invited her in as it was cold outside. Lyra agreed and apologized for the trouble. Jin offered her some tea, handing her a cup. He thanked her for the visit and remarked that the fig pie she brought looked very appetizing. After trying a piece, he happily noted that he hadn't eaten anything more delicious in this city. Lyra said the pie was made using Not's recipe, and Jin thought to himself that the butler was truly talented. Lyra asked what he had been doing before she arrived. Jin replied that he was installing a bathtub. Lyra was surprised, asking if he meant a bathhouse, as such things weren't usually found in homes. Jin said it would be easier to show her and led her to the bathroom. She looked at it with admiration, amazed at how beautiful everything looked. Jin explained that hot water would be poured in, and she could take a bath once everything was completely dry. Lyra thanked him and asked if she could call Not to see it too. Jin agreed. Soon, Not entered, apologized for the intrusion, and looked around the room with surprise. He said the bathtub was indeed beautiful, and Lyra added that she had been given permission to use it once it was ready. Jin was a little flustered and added that the butler could try it too, as the bath was for everyone. He mentally cursed himself, remembering that Lyra was the daughter of a noble family, and he should have been more reserved with her. Not thanked him and admitted that as a servant he should have declined, but his curiosity was stronger. Jin sighed in relief, glad the situation hadn't become awkward. Lyra asked Not to go to the kitchen and check if everything was in order. He agreed, but noted that there was no smell in the house at all, which he found unusual. Lyra also remarked that it was strange. Jin realized they were talking about sewage smells and mentally chuckled. Not explained that the toilet was separated by a wall, preventing odors from spreading throughout the house, and asked with admiration which workshop had done such high-quality work. Jin, slightly flustered, admitted that he had done everything himself. Not initially didn't believe him, but Lyra confirmed his words, saying that Sir Jin had indeed built and installed everything with his own hands. Not was astonished and asked if he had registered this technology with the guild and officially showcased it. Jin said not yet. Not strongly recommended doing so as soon as possible, as such a design would be a real breakthrough. Jin smiled and thought that an easy and profitable income might be awaiting him. Jin stood by the lake, shivering from the cold, quietly cursing the biting wind. He had come there with the intention of gathering materials to sew a futon, a soft and warm blanket he wanted to give Ash as a housewarming gift. Jin thought that perhaps he should have taken care of himself first and made a down jacket, as the frost was getting stronger. However, Jin was determined to finish what he started and head home as soon as possible. To avoid scaring off his prey, he suppressed all sounds around him, creating perfect silence. He raised his bow and shot an arrow with a rope tied to it at a bird. The shot was accurate, the arrow hit its target directly. Jin noted that the shot was a bullseye and prepared to pull his prey towards him. But he suddenly sensed danger. Predators were drawn by the smell of blood. He quickly used teleportation, escaping the unwelcome encounter. Moving to a safe place, he sighed in relief and told himself he had made it just in time. He decided to warm up a bit before returning and thought he needed more feathers for the future gift. Later, Jin knocked on the door of Lyra's new house. Not opened it and seeing him, greeted him politely. Jin asked how the move was progressing. Lyra replied that everything was going very well, largely thanks to Sir Jin's help. Jin mentally noted that he had helped them a bit with the renovations, and at times, the house felt so crowded it was like the entire merchant guild had shown up. He presented his gift, a neatly folded futon, explaining it was a small housewarming present. Noth took the item with surprise, remarking that it felt very light. Jin explained that the futon was made from white goose feathers, which are considered a top-grade material. Lyra added that white geese are extremely cautious, making hunting them quite difficult. Noth, astonished by this, said such a gift was far too luxurious for a simple move. Jin brushed it off, saying he only spent money on arrows and rope. Jin mentally noted that he hadn't realized how expensive his gift actually was. He asked if the kitchen was ready yet and invited Lyra and Noth to have dinner at his place. Lyra seemed embarrassed, saying she felt awkward accepting the invitation, but Noth politely remarked that the young lady could certainly join for dinner. Jin then asked, surprised, if Noth wasn't planning to come with them, but Noth declined, explaining that as a butler, he wasn't supposed to sit at the same table as his mistress. Lyra said that it didn't matter now, as Sir Jin had shown them so much kindness. She suggested Noth join them, and Jin happily agreed. A cozy atmosphere filled the table. Jin served the dishes and invited everyone to help themselves. He proudly announced that he had made a fig pie, trying to replicate Noth's recipe, as well as roasted white goose. Noth respectfully commented that it was a true delicacy. Jin wished them a pleasant meal. Lyra tasted the honey with cheese and exclaimed delightedly that the combination was amazing. Noth noted that the turnip soup was also surprisingly delicious. Jin nodded in agreement, then observed that Lyra was eating with an unusual expression. He thought to himself that he couldn't tell if she liked the food or not, even though the spoon in her hand didn't stop for a second. Gradually, he realized he was starting to understand her emotions a little better. He said she looked pleased, and Lyra confirmed that she really enjoyed the food. Jin was delighted and went to get a second pie. At that moment, Noth was about to say something, but suddenly, something transparent fell onto the pie. Jin immediately realized that spirits had appeared above the dish. Two of them were ones he had summoned himself to keep other spirits away, but the third spirit was unknown. Jin wondered if Ash had noticed this and if she was hiding his abilities from Noth. He frantically tried to figure out how to get out of this awkward situation. He loudly declared that it was probably due to the temperature difference and quickly offered to remove the spoiled pie, adding that he would also bring a rag. Internally, he pondered what to do with the spirit, deciding that temporary confinement would be the best punishment. He remembered that spirits couldn't pass through glass and certain metals. So he quickly grabbed an enamel can nearby, which he had just recently brought, and placed the unwelcome guest inside, saying it would be a pickle brine prison for him. He promised the other spirits, Rose and Kuna, that he would prepare their favorite treats for them later. At that moment, Not called Jin by name, Jin turned around, trying not to reveal his agitation. Not calmly stated that the spirit who spoiled the pie actually belonged to him. He apologized for what happened and said he regretted that his spirit had caused so much inconvenience. Jin couldn't believe his ears and froze, trying to process what he had heard. He was astonished by what he had just learned. Not meanwhile calmly introduced his companion, naming the spirit Quinn, the spirit of the snowy night. He explained that this spirit usually kept a bit of a distance so no one would notice its presence. Jin clarified if Ash knew about the spirit's existence. Not replied negatively and explained that his lineage, the Podal, was an offshoot of the Adelheid family. However, as he noted, a collateral branch cannot be stronger than the main one in terms of abilities. Therefore, the young lady believes he is only capable of seeing spirits, not controlling them. Jin looked closely at Not, noting his gray hair and amber eyes. He realized that outwardly he indeed resembled a relative of Ash. He asked if Not was also capable of using spirits. Jin mentally chuckled, pondering the strange relationship between master and servant. He thought these formalities seemed meaningless, as they were now merely fugitives living without their former status. Not calmly said he wouldn't interfere in others' affairs but clearly wanted to add something more. Jin nodded and asked him to give advance warning about such things next time. He offered to bring a new pie and replace the spoiled one. Not suddenly noticed a faint smell and asked if it was coming from the pickle brine. Jin calmly confirmed that it was. He thought that the butler now knew about his ability to touch spirits but decided not to dwell on it, as they were now in the same boat. Later, Jin found himself in a port city. he noted that it was quite lively. The voices of merchants and the sound of waves could be heard everywhere. He thought that seafood would be useful, and the port itself was a good place to gather information. This place bordered the country where his sister lived and thus could be a source of important rumors. He recalled the words of Miss Toe and others who said that magic was used without restrictions in these lands. People who had exhausted their spirit power allowed spirits to possess animals so they wouldn't disappear completely. If a spirit felt resentment, it would turn into a monster. If there was no resentment, it would become a sacred beast. Jin had come here to find out if his sister was influencing neighboring countries or if there were rumors about her using magic. However, he wondered how exactly he was going to figure all of this out. Nearby, he overheard two men talking. One of them said that the bastards from Surm had ruined the fishing grounds again. The second man added that his son had tried to protest but came back all beaten up. Jin became alert, thinking that what he heard might be useful. The men continued to complain, calling those people scoundrels and mockingly mentioning that they called themselves heroes and saints. One of them, in exasperation, said that such heroes caused more harm than good and expressed hope that if a demon king appeared, he would take them under his protection. At this moment, a thief subtly tried to pick Jin's pocket. Jin quickly grabbed his hand and retrieved his wallet. He thought that this was just a common pickpocket and that his sister, it seemed, hadn't changed at all if such incidents were still happening here. Then he decided to buy some seafood and head back home. At home, Jin enjoyed fresh oysters, noting how delicious they were. Thanks to his appraisal ability, he wasn't worried about digestion. He noted that grilled oysters were also delightful, and the smell of sea urchin and white fish filled the house. He decided to marinate the leftovers in oil. He called Rich, suggesting they play. The animal approached and sniffed his hand. Jin realized that Rich didn't like the smell of seafood. He noticed it was getting dark outside and decided to turn on the light. When the light flashed too brightly, Jin squinted and thought he had gone blind. He cursed under his breath, realizing that his control over magic still left much to be desired. He promised himself that tomorrow, before visiting the guild, he would definitely practice. The next day, he went deep into the demonic forest to improve his skills. He gathered his resolve and began his training. Jin cast a spell, creating a fireball that turned out to be much more powerful than he expected. He realized that control was indeed extremely important and continued to train. Jin created a wind blade, a water barrier, and another fireball until he felt tired. Catching his breath, he noted with satisfaction that he was indeed making progress. The carcasses of the defeated monsters lay before him, and he wondered if he had overdone it. He then put everything into storage and created a soft light. Feeling much more comfortable, he decided it was time to head to the guild. Jin entered the guild building and looked around. He made his way to the bulletin board to see what quests and requests were popular that month. Suddenly, a loud voice nearby called out, urging an investigation deep into the forest. Jin was surprised by the noise and started to listen closely. One of the voices belonged to a man named Chris. He was saying that he hadn't encountered three-horned creatures during his last exploration, but something ominous was clearly brewing deep within the demonic forest. Dean calmly explained that expeditions into the depths of the demonic forest are conducted twice a year. He noted that if Chris hadn't found any three-horned creatures and there was no official request from the guild to investigate them, he couldn't risk it without a good reason. Chris, with a serious expression, stated that three-horned monsters were extremely dangerous enemies on their own. He added that these creatures serve as harbingers of black monsters, and if they aren't stopped now, they will grow stronger over time and become much more powerful. When that happens, it will be too late to fight them. Jin watched the conversation, wondering who this man was. He remembered Dean calling him Chris and felt like he had heard the name before. Just then, Lyra appeared nearby and called Jin by name. He turned to her and, surprised, asked if she had just returned. Lyra nodded, confirming her recent arrival. Chris, overhearing their conversation, looked at the girl with keen interest. He exclaimed that the bear slayer herself stood before him. Chris then added that despite his stern face, he surely understood the importance of this investigation and why the threat couldn't be ignored. Lyra calmly replied that she was new here and didn't have the authority to make decisions. Jin mentally noted that her nickname was certainly impressive. He then took a closer look at Chris and wondered if this was the blonde man Dean had mentioned when they first met at the guild. Back then, Dean had said he refused to train some aristocrat and that Chris, unlike him, would gladly deal with him. Jin thought that this man was clearly not simple and probably caused a lot of trouble for those around him. Chris, noticing the attention had shifted to him, changed his tone and with a slight smile complimented Jin, comparing him to Twilight, saying he was as beautiful as the setting sun. Jin frowned, not immediately understanding how to react to such words. He repeated the comparison to himself and felt a slight embarrassment. Lyra politely replied that it was indeed quite a fitting comparison, especially considering Sir Jin's appearance. Chris introduced himself with a satisfied look, stating his full name, Chris Ides, a 3-star silver rank adventurer. Jin responded somewhat awkwardly, trying to remain calm, and briefly greeted him. Internally, he thought with annoyance that there was no need to make his eye and hair color seem unusual, as if it were some rare wonder. Chris, still smiling, asked if this Twilight guy wanted to go hunting for 3-horned monsters with him. Jin looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he was up to. He mentally noted that Chris was clearly trying to involve him in some dubious venture, and now he would have to carefully figure out what was behind it. Dean could barely suppress a laugh upon hearing the unusual nickname. He asked Chris again who he was referring to and with slight irritation reminded him that they had already discussed it. He clarified that Chris still hadn't found any 3-horned creatures, asking if that was correct. Jin mentally noted that Dean wouldn't miss an opportunity to laugh and promised himself not to forget this moment. Chris admitted that he hadn't actually seen any 3-horned creatures, but added that something strange was happening in the demonic forest. He said that this feeling bothered him and emphasized that intuition was like a second self to him. Jin wondered to himself how one could seriously rely on intuition in such a matter. Dean asked again with a slight sneer if he really relied on intuition. Chris confirmed this, stating that it had never failed him. After a short thought, Dean said that if it was just about feelings, they would have to postpone the expedition until spring because the current conditions were unsuitable. Chris agreed without objection. Jin wondered why Dean had suddenly agreed with the blonde man. He couldn't believe that Dean was actually taking his intuition seriously. At that moment, Not quietly explained to Jin that Mr. Chris likely had a spirit attached to him that possessed the ability to predict. He added that Chris himself probably couldn't see spirits, but this invisible companion helped him make decisions and developed his intuition. Jin thought that everything was becoming clearer now. He reasoned that although few could see spirits, many knew of their existence. If the presence of such a spirit was beneficial, no one would try to banish it. He also noted that most spirits had a minor impact, for example, protecting a person from sunburn or improving health. But Chris, it seemed, was truly lucky as his spirit had granted him something like a sixth sense. Dean concluded that their trip was less like reconnaissance and more like a full-fledged hunt for 3-horned creatures. He said that such a task required at least 2 silver ranks, and it seemed he wouldn't be able to avoid participating. Chris chuckled lightly, reminding Dean that he was still in debt to the guild because of the incident with his sister. Dean was slightly embarrassed and didn't know how to respond. Chris suggested bringing in at least 1 iron rank adventurer with experience fighting 2-horned creatures. Dean countered that they needed someone who had managed to defeat at least 1 3-horned creature, as the danger was too great. He added that he himself didn't intend to stay in the forest for too long. Chris mentioned that ideally, it would be good to involve guilds from other cities as well as gold rank members because the matter was serious. Dean was surprised Chris had gone that far and noted that the atmosphere in the forest was indeed unsettling. Lyra quietly uttered the word overflow, hinting at a possible accumulation of dark forces. Dean turned to Jin, giving a slightly awkward smile, and said that Jin had probably overheard their conversation. He admitted that he felt uncomfortable asking for such a favor, as he already owed Jin, but he requested that Jin accompany them deep into the demonic forest in the spring. Jin briefly refused, almost without hesitation. Dean sighed and said that nothing dangerous would be required of him. He clarified that it would be enough for Jin to simply carry baggage, and if monsters appeared, Jin could leave the fighting to him or even retreat. Dean emphasized that he only wanted Jin to observe what spirits were gathering in the heart of the forest and had no intention of forcing him to fight. Jin thought that, to be honest, he was a little curious himself about what was happening there. After a brief consideration, he agreed. Dean nodded contentedly and said he also planned to invite Ash so that the two of them could investigate everything more thoroughly. Jin figured that Noth would most likely go with them too, meaning there would be 3 of them, but he considered further details to be of little concern to him. Dean added that while he wished to resolve this sooner, there was nothing to do in the forest during winter, so they would wait until spring. He promised to contact Jin through the guild when the time came. Later, Jin pondered that he hadn't learned much during his time in the port city. If his sister had indeed used powerful magic, that could be the cause of the anomalies in the demonic forest. He noted that he, his sister, and 2 other companions had been in these lands for several months. It seemed strange to him as his sister lived far from this place. Jin felt annoyed that he was repeatedly forced to solve other people's problems, as if covering up for someone else's mistakes. The next day, he firmly decided to return to the demonic forest to understand what was happening for himself. In the inner part of the demonic forest, Jin decided it was time to activate his spirit-seeing vision. He slowly activated the ability and carefully looked around. Most of the spirits, he noticed, were heading towards his home. However, among the multitude of creatures, he distinguished several dark and wounded spirits whose bodies appeared damaged and unstable. Some of these spirits gradually diminished in size until they completely disappeared. Jin realized they were absorbing parts of other spirits' bodies to restore their own shattered forms. This sight seemed unpleasant and even disturbing to him. He figured that healing didn't work on spirits, so the only way to help was to infuse his own power, just like he had done with Rich before. Jin also remembered that spirits needed to be given names to establish a connection with them and strengthen their existence. He began naming those around him, giving them simple names like Black 1, Black 2, Black 3, and Black 4. Later, after finishing his work, Jin let out a tired sigh. He felt he had done enough for the day and decided to call it quits. This time, the initiative came from him, meaning everything was going according to his plan. It was especially difficult for him to name the spirits who refused to obey and stubbornly avoided his attention. He was tired of playing a sort of hide-and-seek with them and decided he would continue his work tomorrow. After that, Jin headed to Dinaso's house and after knocking, quietly entered. He politely greeted them, asking if he was interrupting. Dinaso happily called out his name. The children, noticing the guest, excitedly shouted and ran up to him. Dinaso, unable to contain his emotions, hugged Jin tightly and with a smile, invited him inside. Jin was a little embarrassed, gave an uncertain agreement, and noted to himself that he still wasn't used to such warm and strong hugs. He handed the hosts the treats, saying he had brought liquor, as well as many other goodies, including a fresh cake. Dinaso exclaimed with admiration that the liquor was a wonderful gift. The children rejoiced and surrounding Jin, hugged him, gratefully repeating his name. Jin thought this family simply adored hugging and didn't hold back their displays of affection. Dinaso was already reaching for the bottle of liquor, but Shiva stopped him and smiled, thanking Jin for the treats. She said she would cut the cake now and suggested they all eat it together at one table. Jin agreed and respectfully addressed her as Mrs. Shiva. He remembered how he had met this family. They became friends when Jin was learning the art of cheese making from them at a local farm. Shiva gathered the brought treats and carefully carried them to the kitchen. Dinaso sighed and said with a touch of sadness that the happiness was short-lived because the liquor would still have to be put away. Jin asked what they had been doing before he arrived. Dinaso explained that they were cleaning beans. He added that it was one of those calm activities that were pleasant to do in winter by the fireplace. Besides that, they were also repairing tools and doing small household chores. Jin readily offered his help. Dinaso gratefully accepted the offer. At that moment, Shiva called everyone, saying the cake was ready. When the family gathered at the table, Dinaso's daughter, with a naive smile, said that in the future she wanted to be Jin's wife. Dinaso exclaimed loudly in surprise. Shiva said with a light laugh that it was not a bad choice, as Jin could indeed make their daughter happy. Dinaso was indignant and declared that her father had not yet given his consent. He reminded her that their youngest daughter, Tina, once said she would grow up and marry her dad. Shiva just smiled and teased her husband, saying he simply didn't know how to lose. Jin awkwardly said he wasn't going to get married at all and thought to himself that he certainly wasn't going to tie himself down with a child. Dinaso sharply cried out when he heard Jin's words. His voice was filled with indignation and disbelief. He struggled to control his emotions and exclaimed that Jin wasn't going to get married, which meant he didn't like his daughter. Jin responded calmly, though irritation was audible in his voice. He reminded Dinaso that Dinaso himself had just said he didn't want to marry off his daughter. At that moment, Dinaso's sons, overhearing the conversation, unexpectedly declared that they also wanted to marry Jin and become part of his family. Their childlike spontaneity brought laughter and surprise to everyone present. They happily ran up to Jin and hugged him, openly expressing their feelings. Jin thought that these children had absolutely no self-control and openly showed everything they felt. Dinaso added with a smile that since that was the case, he also wanted to join the group hug. He took a step forward, wanting to embrace Jin, but Jin resolutely pulled away and refused, firmly saying no. Internally, Jin felt a slight warmth. He thought that he genuinely enjoyed this cozy family atmosphere where everyone laughed and shared joy. He realized that this cheerful and sincere interaction was different from his own childhood. Back then, his family was far from normal, and he couldn't remember ever feeling such happiness. Engrossed in daily worries and travels, Jin didn't notice spring arrive. With the first warmth came the time for a new reconnaissance mission. Chris, noticing them, exclaimed that he was glad to see the Child of the Moon and Jin, the Prince of Darkness. Jin was surprised by Ash's new nickname and quietly noted to himself that Ash always seemed to get strange names. Letzi approached them and greeted Jin warmly. Jin replied that he hadn't seen him in a long time. Letzi chuckled and said that Chris seemed to have dragged Jin into a new endeavor. He explained that Dean and Chris would be responsible for the battles, but advised Jin to be careful and look around attentively. Letzi admitted that he was a little worried about the fact that they were taking an inexperienced rookie with them. Dean confidently countered that Jin was capable of handling dangers as he had hunted bears alone. These words surprised Letzi and Chris. Letzi thought that the famous rookie who hunted bears was Ash. Then Ash clarified that yes, it was him now, but originally Sir Jin was the one who did it. Jin smiled and said that it had indeed been a long time since he had appeared at the guild. Dean added that if there was anything wrong with them, the guild would never have let them go on such a dangerous journey. Chris laughed, remarking that it was now clear where his strange premonition to bring the Prince of Darkness had come from. Jin thought that it was probably Chris's intuition at work again, or rather, a hint from his spiritual companion. It seemed quite strange to him how calmly he was stroking the dimple on his chin, as if nothing was happening. Kaina approached them and thanked everyone for their help. She bowed politely and expressed special gratitude to Jin for his cooperation, despite the inconvenience they had caused him. Jin replied that nothing serious had happened. He thought that Miss Kaina was certainly not to blame for any difficulties. Kaina then looked at the bundle in his bag and apologized, explaining that they would like to know more about this find once they returned. She informed them that the guild had asked her to give each participant a special potion and wished everyone good luck and a safe journey. Dean became interested in Jin's bag and noted that it looked unusual. He asked where he got such leather. Ash noticed the bundle lying on top and asked what it was. Jin explained that he made the leather himself and the bundle was just a blanket. Ash was surprised and remarked that a blanket could get in the way during a fight with monsters. Dean added that it looked heavy and would be difficult to quickly discard because of that. Jin showed them the metal clasp and explained that he just needed to press it for the strap to instantly come off. Chris appreciated the idea and said that such a design was more convenient than their bags. Jin glanced at Chris's spirit and mentally thought that he was making a serious face again. He felt awkward about how the spirit was tenderly touching its owner's chin. He mentally grumbled that Ash and Knot were calmly watching this and asked them to stop. During their journey, they fought monsters, moving confidently and in a coordinated manner. After a while, Dean suggested they stop for lunch. The weather was clear and calm, and he noted that the road had been easier than expected. Jin took out his camping cooking utensils and began preparing food. He added dried chicken, onions, and shiitake mushrooms to the pot. Then he seasoned it with salt and pepper, stirred it, and said that everything was ready. Dean looked at Jin's sandwich with admiration and remarked that lunch looked very appetizing. Jin offered him some, saying that there was too much food and some of it might spoil. Chris enthusiastically noted that the bread was soft. Dean said he preferred a harder crust, but Jin's meat was indeed delicious. Letzi became interested and asked what the sandwich was covered with. Jin replied that it was breading. Not repeated the word in confusion, admitting that he didn't quite understand what it meant. Jin explained in detail that the dish he was talking about was pork mixed with egg and flour, then generously coated in breadcrumbs before being fried to a golden crisp. He noted that making good oyster sauce isn't easy, as it requires precise proportions and patience. Ash happily tried the food and said it was really delicious, adding that the chicken pieces were especially tender and juicy. Jin confirmed it was chicken fried in oil to perfection, not suggested that this dish wasn't as simple as it seemed either, as its flavor was too rich. With a slight smile, Jin explained that he used salt, pepper, garlic, ginger, a little fish sauce, and a touch of brandy as seasonings, which gave the aroma depth and softness. After lunch, Dean said with satisfaction that everyone was full and suggested they continue their journey. As they walked, Jin noticed his boots seemed the dirtiest of all. He wondered if he was walking incorrectly or just not placing his feet carefully enough. Jin's gaze fell on Not's shoes, which remained perfectly clean and shined as if new. He mentally called him a true butler and decided to try to imitate his elegant gait to avoid getting bogged down in the mud. Chris warned everyone that from this point on they would encounter many wolves. He said these creatures were weaker than bears but far more dangerous because they attacked in packs. He added that they shouldn't rely too much on their protection, as everyone should be able to defend themselves, retreat, and take care of themselves. Jin replied that he understood and would be careful. He noted mentally that Chris was excellent at his job and approached tasks responsibly. However, Jin felt that his strict and serious style was a bit irritating. After a while, Chris spotted the first group of wolves and announced it to the others. At that very moment, several predators lunged forward and Jin became their target. He wondered why they chose him, deciding he probably looked the weakest among the squad, which had plenty of gaps in combat experience. Dean called out his name, but Jin confidently replied that he could handle it himself. He instantly activated his abilities and eliminated several wolves with little effort. His movements were precise and his strikes were fast and accurate. Letzi, watching the fight, exclaimed in surprise that Jin was indeed strong, as his combat looked easy and natural. Chris chuckled and said that perhaps Jin's defense only looked weak because he didn't need it at all. Jin thought that wasn't entirely true, he just wasn't used to being constantly on guard, as battles required a different level of focus than his usual work. Dean looked at him closely and noted that his movements showed Jin wasn't used to fighting often. However, the strength and confidence he displayed in combat made it seem as if he was intentionally hiding his true level. Letzi admitted he felt a bit awkward, as Ash and Jin were complete newcomers but were already demonstrating such skill that he felt inadequate next to them. Meanwhile, Not noticed that horned wolves were starting to be drawn to the smell of blood. He said they needed to quickly gather everything valuable from the fallen creatures to avoid attracting new packs. Dean ordered everyone to hurry up and leave the area as quickly as possible. He added that they needed to set up camp far from the clearing where the wolf bodies remained so that the night would pass peacefully and without new attacks. Jin was setting up the tent, thoughtfully examining his work and wondering if he had reinforced everything enough for the shelter to withstand potential wind and rain. Dean approached him, observing his actions with a smirk, and noted that Jin hadn't shown any love for camping before, but now it seemed he had quite gotten used to this lifestyle. Chris looked at the result of Jin's work with interest, admiring how he managed to create a reliable roof and wall, protecting against wind and moisture using just a simple waterproof tarp. Jin calmly explained that not liking camping and knowing how to do it were completely different things, then pulled away, not allowing Chris to hug him. He recalled to himself that he had previously had to survive alone on an island for almost 2 months, so such tasks had long become routine for him. Ash noticed that Jin had placed moss inside the tent to make the sleeping area softer, and decided to do the same to make sleeping more comfortable. Chris expressed a desire to gather some moss too, but complained that it wasn't growing near the camp. Not remarked that if there were any moss here, the whole group would have already trampled it. Jin thought that such an attitude towards nature wouldn't be approved of in Japan, but in this world, people treated such things much more simply and without unnecessary restrictions. Dean said he was going to go fishing for dinner, and Jin offered to prepare soup to warm up in the evening. Dean approved the idea and noted that it would get cool as night fell, so hot soup would be very welcome. Jin mentally listed the ingredients, deciding to make soup with dried meat, tomatoes, chickpeas, and various vegetables, and also noted that he had already kneaded dough for another dish. Dean soon returned but stopped when he saw Jin vigorously beating the dough, and for a moment thought he was performing some strange ritual. After finishing kneading the dough, Jin noted with satisfaction that it had become smooth and elastic, after which he left it to rest and began preparing ingredients for breakfast. Later, Dean returned and looked at the finished dish with surprise, admiringly noting that it looked incredibly appetizing. Jin replied that he had prepared pizza with bacon and wild asparagus. Chris admitted he had never heard of pizza before and tried a piece with interest. Dean realized that the strange dough beating was part of the preparation and happily noted that the dish turned out very delicious. Knott added that he liked the salty taste of the dish and said it would pair well with various ingredients. Jin remarked that ketchup would also go well with this dish. Knott repeated the word, and Jin wondered if tomatoes even existed in this world, as he hadn't seen them growing anywhere yet. He remembered adding dried tomatoes to the soup, but it seemed no one even noticed them. Ash complimented the soup, saying it was very tasty. Chris smiled and said Jin would make an excellent wife, adding that it was a bit disappointing. Jin thought to himself that he shouldn't regret being a different gender and asked Chris not to look so disappointed. Dean unexpectedly changed the subject to brides and curiously asked what type of girls Jin preferred, hinting that his own sister was clearly not his type. He jokingly asked if Jin liked women with large breasts. Jin sternly told him not to demonstrate on himself, while Ash calmly remarked that Dean's chest wasn't bad either. Jin thought with internal irritation that a girl shouldn't be envious of such things, and Knott, as a butler, shouldn't be upset about it. He explained that he didn't consider himself a snob but admitted he had some difficulties interacting with people. Dean suggested that Jin simply didn't trust people. Jin agreed, adding that he had always been surrounded by untrustworthy people, and that as a child, people even joked about him, confessing their love for fun. Letzi suggested that perhaps they later told him it was all a misunderstanding, and the girl meant something entirely different. Chris was indignant that someone could play such a cruel trick on a person he now considered the Prince of Darkness. Dean tried to justify the situation, saying that maybe the girls were just afraid he would laugh at them. Jin calmly recounted that it happened 3 times, first when he was 6, then at 10, and again at 14, and they were completely different people each time. Dean asked again in astonishment and said that 3 such incidents sounded like a real curse. Letzi gently remarked that not all women were like that and expressed confidence that Jin understood this. Jin nodded, saying he realized the exceptional nature of the situation and was trying to get his life back on track. He thought that his sister was actually to blame for all of it. The first of the 3 girls was her friend's sister, and the confession happened at a fireworks festival, and he knew his sister had orchestrated it all. The second and third times, she didn't appear herself but clearly controlled what was happening from behind the scenes, as both girls were connected to her. He remembered that his sister once considered him her property and enjoyed teasing him. Because of this, he had to endure a lot, and after the second incident, he simply pretended to believe her tricks. Chris looked at Jin and, with a slight awkwardness, admitted he didn't even know what to say in such a situation, but asked him not to get discouraged and to hang in there. Jin thanked him with a short nod. He noted to himself that despite spring having arrived, the nights were still quite cold and the dampness chilled him to the bone. Suddenly, Az appeared next to him, gently landing on his shoulder, and soon after, Ash arrived, saying she had come to relieve him from his watch. Jin offered her a treat, suggesting she have a snack, and Ash thanked him not only for the food but for everything else. She mentioned that the coat Jin made was surprisingly light, warm, and comfortable. Jin replied that he made it more as a hobby, and besides, she had already paid him back for the potions. He noticed her strange expression and wondered if Ash didn't like the Florentine biscuit he had recently baked. Ash suddenly said that Jin was a good person and wished him a long and happy life. Jin was a little flustered and thanked her, not understanding the reason for her sincere tone. Ash explained that many declarations of love were just jokes and pranks without any real feelings behind them. Jin realized that Ash was continuing their earlier conversation and was likely trying to support him in this way. He said that since then he had met many different people, and gradually his distrust of others had begun to wane. Ash replied that she was glad if their meeting also helped change his attitude towards people. Jin nodded, thanked her, and said he was going to rest a bit. He thought that Ash was straightforward, which sometimes put him in an awkward position, but there was a certain sincerity to it. She was the complete opposite of his sister. She had no hidden motives or cunning intentions. He decided it was time to get some sleep to gather strength for tomorrow. In the morning, Letzi remarked that he was eating even better here than in the city. Dean agreed, adding that only a mug of cold beer was missing to make dinner absolutely perfect. Jin noted to himself that several days had passed since they left the city. During this time, they had hunted, gathered berries and herbs, gradually moving towards their goal. He also noted that so far, they hadn't encountered any two-horned or three-horned monsters that the locals had talked about. Ash mentioned a red ain. Not observed that these ripe berries had a sweet taste with a slight hint of black pepper, which made them pair perfectly with black grouse meat. Jin mused to himself that ain was probably the name of a drink, perhaps something similar to red wine. Chris was surprised to see Jin bake bread right in the pan, and admitted he didn't think it was even possible. Jin mentally noted that he served the bread with black grouse liver pate. He remembered they didn't have milk, so he got rid of the liver's unpleasant smell using salted water. He reasoned that liver contains a lot of iron and vitamins A and B, making it especially useful in camping conditions where the diet mainly consists of meat and fish. Jin thought he seemed to be the only one in the group concerned about balanced nutrition. Suddenly, Chris asked if Jin was planning to sleep by the river. Jin clarified that it wasn't a sleeping tent, but an improvised steam bath he'd made while the others were fishing. He explained that he had gathered branches, tied them into a dome shape, and covered them with a tarp to keep the heat inside. Chris asked if there was room for a fire inside, and Jin explained that after the stones heated up, they needed to be doused with water to create steam. Chris remarked admiringly that Jin had come up with an amazing solution, and Jin said that in this sauna, one could get a good sweat going and then cool off in the river. Chris respectfully acknowledged that when it came to comfort, Jin truly had no equal. Jin decided to take those words as a compliment. He offered Chris the chance to use the bath if he wanted, and Chris happily agreed, genuinely thanking him. The other squad members watched Jin, clearly interested in his invention. Jin noticed their gazes and asked if they wanted to try it too. Dean replied that he wouldn't mind. Letzi said the bath sounded quite tempting. Ash nodded affirmatively and Not added that he would join if no one objected. Jin noted that all the squad members had already used his bath. Now that night had fallen, he realized it was too late to set up a tent. The tarp needed to dry, so he decided to sleep under the open sky right beneath the stars. There was moisture in the air and the forest rustled quietly around him, filled with spirits, especially numerous near the river. He asked his spirits to keep others away from him so they wouldn't disturb his rest. However, the thought lingered that he would like to catch some spirits and give them names, but he knew such actions could attract unwanted attention. Jin noticed that recently black spirits had become significantly more numerous than before, and this caused him alarm. The next morning, Dean cheerfully declared that he felt refreshed and full of energy after yesterday's steam bath, which Jin had set up. Chris agreed with him, adding that thanks to it, they would be able to move faster and further today. However, their path was suddenly interrupted by Dean's warning. He spotted a three-horned monitor lizard ahead and cautiously stated that the opponent looked particularly dangerous. Letzi explained that these creatures are incredibly resilient, and to kill such a monster, one must sever its head or pierce its heart. Even after a fatal wound, it can still move for some time, so they shouldn't approach until Dean gave permission. Dean reminded them that the skin on the monitor lizard's back was tougher than bone, and the only chance for an effective strike was to wait until it raised its head and exposed its throat. He suggested a two-pronged attack and coordinated with Chris. Dean distracted the monster, and then Chris skillfully plunged his sword right into its neck. The monster twitched and collapsed to the ground. Ash praised them for their excellent work and Not added that everything went exactly as expected. Letzi admitted that even though he knew everything would end well, his heart was pounding from the tension. Jin watched the fight and mentally noted that such a strategy was great for a well-coordinated team, but it wouldn't benefit him alone. He understood that if he had to fight by himself, he would need to find other tactics. Letzi reminded them that the appearance of three-horned monsters deep in the forest confirmed their fears. Only a week had passed since their journey began, but the situation had changed. Usually, only hornless and single-horned creatures roamed these parts, but now things were becoming much more alarming. Jin wondered how vast this forest was if, after a week of travel, they still hadn't approached its edge. Dean concluded that the main goal of the reconnaissance had been achieved, but suggested they go a little further, set up camp, and then head back. Once everything was decided, Chris asked Jin for help butchering the monitor lizard's carcass. Jin calmly agreed and got to work. Letzi was surprised by how confidently and skillfully he handled the knife, and Jin noted to himself that he had practiced this while hunting. He had developed his own butchering style that allowed him to preserve the maximum amount of edible meat. Nevertheless, he was again alarmed that there were even more black spirits around. Their number was still less than in the training forest, but larger and stronger specimens were appearing. Jin wondered if an animal possessed by such a spirit would turn into a monster with multiple horns. He decided this was a question that required observation. He asked Letzi how much usable meat was left. In response, he heard that there was quite a lot of game. Jin was pleased, noting that monitor lizard meat tasted like chicken, and decided it would be good to fry it with herbs. He said that while the others were hunting, he could gather some wild asparagus for a side dish. Letzi warned Jin not to stray too far from the camp. He explained that monsters were afraid of fire, so it was safer to stay nearby, although if they lacked food, they might attack even despite the flames. Jin thanked him for the advice and replied that he would be careful. He went to gather plants and noticed several fayuhira mushrooms that usually remain after winter. Nearby, cruciferous garlic mustard was growing. Jin pondered if he could make pasta with those ingredients for breakfast. He used his search ability again to check the surroundings and noticed a fox rapidly approaching them from the other side of the forest clearing. He identified it as a two-horned specimen. The animal ran straight towards the camp, showing no fear of the fire. Jin realized the beast had probably smelled the fresh meat and was heading towards it as a source of prey. He quickly informed Letzi that a monster fox had appeared nearby and suggested getting rid of the smell. Letzi covered the leftover meat with cedar leaves to hide the scent and took out an ointment that suppressed the smell of blood. He suggested everyone apply it and hide downwind so the predator wouldn't sense their presence. But Jin already felt the creature was very close. He tensed up and prepared for battle. He understood that the fox was weaker than the monitor lizard and decided he could handle it himself. At that moment, Letzi anxiously called out to him and the predatory two-horned fox emerged from the bushes. Letzi loudly called Jin's name, noting that he had just fought. Jin managed to defeat the fox and his companions approached in surprise. Dean, seeing the beast's carcass, didn't immediately understand what had happened. Letzi explained that it was indeed a fox and emphasized that Jin was the one who had killed it. Dean was astonished when he learned that Jin had single-handedly dealt with a two-horned monster. Chris said admiringly that such an achievement was simply incredible for someone of bronze rank and added that Jin truly had outstanding abilities. Not noted that the main thing was everyone remained alive and unharmed. However, Dean looked concerned and said that Jin's success was good, but there was a more troubling point. He reminded them that they had only expected to encounter monitor lizards and the appearance of a fox changed everything. Jin was curious about what he meant. Dean explained that monitor lizards usually don't travel long distances, unlike foxes which can move quickly and easily reach the nearest town. Chris added that if a three-horned monster had already appeared here, then a fox could soon become three-horned too, especially considering that two-horned specimens were already being encountered. Jin nodded, realizing the seriousness of the threat. Dean said that this needed to be reported immediately and decided that the squad would depart in the morning. Late at night, Jin noticed his companions had caught many birds and jokingly said that it seemed they had enjoyed the chicken cooked earlier that day. Dean agreed, saying the food was delicious. Letzi added that he eats better in the forest than in the city, not praised the pasta Jin made, noting that it was also excellent. There were no incidents on the way back, and the reconnaissance mission safely came to an end. When they returned, Kaina met them at the guild entrance and thanked them for their work. Jin mentally sighed in relief, glad they were finally home. Kaina informed them that they now needed to report the mission results to the guild management. Jin thought with annoyance that he wished he could avoid bureaucratic conversations. He asked Ash and not to collect his reward for him as he wanted to leave early. Not replied that it was no problem. Ash asked if something had happened and Jin said he was just going to prepare a bath and invited them to come over later. Ash agreed. When Dean noticed Jin was about to leave, he called out to him, saying he would tell him later what decision the guild had made. Jin thanked him and headed home. Upon returning, he sighed tiredly and asked the spirits to warn him if anyone came to visit. Jin noted in his thoughts that apparently if you keep fires burning in two houses, the spirits in the fireplaces can exchange messages. Thanks to this, he would know if anyone showed up while he was away. He activated the storage, filled the bath, and checked the water, pleased that it hadn't cooled down. He didn't like bathing in a cold room, so he activated the teleport and moved to another house. There he met a spirit named Rich and with a smile said he hadn't seen him in a long time, but they could only play after he took a bath because he felt very dirty. He had to lather up 3 times to completely wash off the dirt accumulated during the expedition. When the spirit came and informed him that the guests had arrived, Jin thanked him and teleported back. He mentally noted that the house was now warmer, refilled the bath with hot water, and invited Ash and Not to enter, apologizing for the delay. Ash said everything was fine and Not handed Jin the reward for the mission. Jin thanked him and offered them to use the bath, saying everything was ready. Ash gratefully accepted the invitation. Not being polite, offered Ash to go first, while he sat down to drink the tea Jin had served him. He thanked the owner and asked where he got such a comfortable and beautiful bathtub. Jin replied that he bought it in the city of Eddy, located in the kingdom of Pastor. Not was surprised, noting that delivery from there would take about half a year, and said that for now, they would make do with a regular wooden tub. Jin thought to himself that Not probably assumed he was from the same kingdom, given his habits and tableware. After a short pause, Not inquired about the robes Jin had lent them and offered to buy them. Jin replied that he wanted to give them as a gift, but Not politely but firmly refused to accept them for free. He also mentioned that at today's guild meeting, they decided to form an assault team for a new expedition deeper into the forest, and informed Jin that he and Ash had decided to join. Jin mentally sighed, understanding that this meant another dangerous mission. Not handed over the money for the robes, despite Jin's refusal, and said he insisted. At that moment, Ash returned, announcing that she had finished bathing. Jin calmly said that he was going to prepare the next batch of hot water, offering Ash some tea so she could relax and warm up a bit. Ash replied that she wanted to help but Not gently insisted that the lady rest. Jin thought that for Not, as a true servant, it was unthinkable to allow his mistress to prepare the bath. After that, Not headed towards the bathroom, and Jin reminded him not to rush. Jin noticed that it was the first time he had seen Ash with her hair down, and noted to himself that she seemed slightly tense. He felt that the frightening coldness which seemed almost murderous had returned to her gaze. He cautiously asked if everything was all right. Ash replied that she was remembering the spirits they had seen in the forest, and mentioned that she had only witnessed something similar once before, during the time when the court mage was rampaging. Jin admitted that he had never seen exactly how people use such magic, and asked her to explain how this process usually occurs. Ash explained that spirits can share their magic for 2 reasons. Either because they genuinely like the person, or because they are bound by a spell that serves as a form of contract. According to her, spirits usually voluntarily give about 1/5 of their power. However, there are ways to get more, either by entering into a forced contract or by destroying the spirit with magic and extracting its power. Ash emphasized that spirits are made of their magical energy, and if all of it is taken away, they completely disappear. Jin realized that the spirits he had seen disintegrating had probably experienced something similar. Ash nodded and said that the blackening of spirits indicated a deep resentment towards humans within them. She added that this process isn't limited to turning beasts into monsters. Such an effect can also spread to the mage themselves and the people around them. Jin clarified that in such a case, people could indeed turn into demons. Ash responded seriously that it was entirely possible. At that moment, Jin thought about his sister, speculating that if this kind of magic continued to be used, she might become a demon lord instead of the hero everyone expected. He sighed and said that, according to Ash, it would be better not to use such magic at all, but Ash gently disagreed. She explained that spirits are capable of recovering and even strengthening their powers, regaining a little more energy than they expend. She added that magical power stabilizes the existence of spirits, and they are drawn to the element they belong to. Fire spirits are drawn to flames and water spirits to sources of water. These beings, she said, are very loyal and curious, as magic connects what usually disperses. If you treat them carefully and don't force them to act against their will, they are more than happy to help. Ash added that her own spirit as could have also turned dark but remained loyal to her despite the risk. Looking at all this, she compared him to other spirits and felt sad. Jin understood why Ash looked so down. She was worried about the condition of the spirits they had seen in the forest. To distract the girl a bit, he apologized, asked her to wait a minute, and returned with a small plate. He told her not to say anything to the butler and offered her some sweets. Ash was surprised, saying she had never seen anything like it before. Jin replied that was precisely why he asked her to keep it a secret, as sweets could help distract her and lift her spirits. Ash thanked him for his concern and apologized if she had caused any trouble. Jin suggested they wash down the sweets with tea and asked if they tasted good. Ash nodded and said that she had tried apple pies before, but this was completely different. She praised the treat, especially the combination with the white cream, and asked what the red berries were. Jin replied that they were strawberries. In his mind, he chuckled, noting that Ash had tried the unknown dish first and only then decided to find out what she had eaten. He thought that perhaps all aristocrats behaved so carelessly. Jin admitted to himself that he wasn't used to comforting people, and so all he could do for her was simply offer her something delicious. He asked if Ash liked it. She nodded affirmatively, and Jin noted that she really did look pleased. Ash said that liked didn't even begin to cover her feelings, as she hadn't expected to relax so easily. Jin smiled and replied that there was nothing wrong with that, noting that even Az's spirit had brightened up. Ash looked at him and agreed. Jin mentally noted that he was glad to see Ash's mood improve and felt a quiet satisfaction that he had been able to ease her anxiety, even if just a little. Jin approached Letzi and asked if he was heading back into the forest. Letzi happily remarked that Jin had arrived at the perfect time and immediately asked him to make another item like the previous one, but preferably out of fabric. He added that he was willing to pay for the work. Jin was a bit surprised and clarified if he really wanted a fabric version, then said he would need to measure his back to ensure a proper fit. While Jin was taking measurements, Letzi mentioned that Dean and Chris had also ordered backpacks. Jin confirmed this but noted that they preferred leather versions. Letzi said he didn't want to stand out, explaining that if his item was too flashy, someone might try to steal it. Jin grew wary upon hearing about theft and asked him to clarify what he meant. Letzi explained that all silver-ranked adventurers from Canum City were obligated to participate in the upcoming expedition unless they had a valid reason to decline. He added that iron-ranked adventurers were also being recruited for the expedition, as they could earn a star if they managed to defeat a few monsters. According to him, there were many strong fighters in the iron rank who couldn't advance further simply because they lacked stars. This was a unique opportunity for them to prove themselves. Jin asked if stars couldn't be earned by simply completing regular guild quests. Letzi explained that stars were awarded not for the number of completed assignments, but for a genuine contribution to the common cause. He emphasized that it was very difficult for people with bad reputations or aggressive behavior to earn a new star, which made him uneasy about the expedition's composition. Jin realized this was why Letzi was being so cautious. Letzi confirmed it was a natural reaction. Jin pondered this, noting to himself that the method of earning stars indeed depended on one's rank. He himself held a copper rank, but thanks to the large quantity of healing supplies he had provided, he had already accumulated enough stars to pass the promotion test. Letzi added that copper-ranked mages and fighters could also participate in such expeditions if recommended by a higher-ranking guild member. Jin said that Ash and Knot would be participating specifically on Chris's recommendation. He then thought that he wasn't particularly interested in any of it himself. As Jin continued his work, Letzi flinched slightly and complained that he was ticklish. Jin apologized, saying he would be done soon, and asked when the expedition was planned to depart. Letzi replied that the exact date depended on a person named Aimdio and estimated that the gathering would take place in about a month. Jin asked who Aimdio was. Letzi explained that this was a gold-ranked adventurer the guild had great difficulty convincing to join the expedition. According to him, Aimdio had teamed up with a powerful mage who was also expected to achieve gold rank soon. Jin was surprised to hear that a mage was involved and thought it would be very interesting to see this person. Letzi continued, saying the guild didn't anticipate a major surge in monster activity. He mentioned that, in the leadership's opinion, only one or two particularly strong creatures had appeared, so Aimdio's help should be more than enough. Then he brought up hearing about Aimdio's ability to see spirits, which piqued Jin's interest even further. Later, once in the demonic forest, Jin decided he would hunt monitor lizards to get their hides and make backpacks for the rest of the group. In the process, he caught one of the spirits and named it Blackie 95. Jin decided he would catch black spirits whenever possible so that Ash wouldn't see them and worry unnecessarily. He looked at the surrounding forest and sighed, realizing he now truly had his hands full. Ash called out to Jin, addressing him respectfully. Jin greeted Ash and Not, apologizing for making them wait a bit. Not replied that, on the contrary, he was grateful to Jin for his time. Jin noted to himself that he had decided to go shopping with them today and help with the necessary items. He pulled out the pre-made bags and announced that these were the very items they had ordered, and they could now take them. Ash thanked him with slight embarrassment and said she was sorry he had to work on such short notice. Not added that they should pay for his labor, but Jin calmly replied that there was no rush with the payment and they could wait a little. Thinking to himself, Jin noted that he had ended up making bags for all members of their team, and thanks to his accumulated experience, the production wasn't all that difficult. He asked if they were going shopping too early. As far as he knew, the quest was still postponed and Aimdio hadn't arrived yet. Ash explained that there were too many adventurers in the city now, so it was wiser to prepare in advance before the hustle and bustle began. Jin nodded and thought that Letzi's words had indeed been true. Many people were flocking to the city. At that moment, two strangers approached them, grinning, and demanded some money from Jin, then offered to buy them a drink. Jin sighed internally, thinking he hadn't even stepped onto the street before thugs were bothering him. He didn't understand why such people always picked on him. Not wanting to waste time talking, Jin silently kicked one of them, quickly ending the conflict. Ash immediately asked if he was hurt, but Jin looked completely calm. Just then, Chris appeared, indignant at the hooligan's stupidity, saying that only complete idiots would dare to mess with the Prince of Darkness himself. Dean followed, asking everyone not to escalate the fight, saying there was no need to start brawls without even trying to sort things out with words. Jin noticed with surprise that Letzi had also come with them. Nearby, two locals were chatting, saying that messing with the black bear was the height of foolishness, but they added that the thugs weren't from their town anyway. Jin mentally noted that this was the first time he'd heard himself called the Black Bear and wondered where the nickname came from. To lighten the mood, Not suggested they all grab a bite at the nearest restaurant. Chris enthusiastically agreed and proposed celebrating their unexpected reunion. At the table, Jin asked what everyone had been up to since the investigation ended. Chris replied that he had a meeting with guild representatives, then added that Dean had simply run off without waiting for things to conclude. Letzi mentioned that he had been gathering medicinal herbs in the meantime. Jin pointed out that it wasn't his place to judge, but wasn't Dean the one assigned the very quest he'd run from? He then asked where Dean had been all this time. Dean seemed a bit flustered and admitted he had been looking for a new place to live. Chris was surprised he decided to move, and Dean explained that he used to live with his sister but had now rented a room in an inn, leaving his sister under their mother's care. He added that at the guild, she had been transferred from reception to the housekeeping department, where she was now learning the ropes. According to Dean, if his sister had stayed with him, she would have relaxed again and stopped developing. Ash said she had been hunting bears recently, which made Jin mentally note that Ash's behavior seemed to be unchanged. Jin recalled their recent conversation and asked if he had misheard being called the Black Bear. Dean confirmed it was no mistake at all. He explained that he and Ash now had a reputation as bear hunters, and because of this, they were sometimes mistaken for other people. Not clarified that such misunderstandings indeed happened quite often. Jin sighed and said that if he had to choose a symbol, he'd prefer a wolf over a bear. Chris remarked with a smile that the bear image really didn't suit Jin's dark, twilight beauty. Jin looked at him with slight annoyance but didn't respond. Dean added that there was already a famous adventurer known as the Wolf King named Bomber, so there was no point in using a similar nickname. Jin was intrigued and asked again who Bomber was. Chris explained that he was a legendary hero who had gone missing, but his name was still alive and commanded respect from many. Jin thought with a slight smile that, apparently, Dean truly admired Bomber and perhaps dreamed of being like him. Dean enthusiastically said that Bomber was an incredibly wonderful and inspiring person. He confessed that he became an adventurer solely because of Bomber's example, and that meeting him had changed his entire life. Dean wondered if he had told this story before, as this memory held special significance for him. Jin thought with surprise that Dean had decided to become an adventurer for such a simple reason, yet had managed to reach silver rank, which in itself deserved respect. Jin decided to change the subject and announced that he had finished making the bags. He handed them over to the team, noting that these were for Chris and Dean, with a separate bag for Letzi. Dean thanked him, examined the gift, and noticed that the inside of the bag was lined with leather. He was surprised by such durable finishing, as it looked expensive and substantial. Jin calmly replied that he had deliberately made them more durable so they would withstand long journeys. Dean commented that with such quality, the item should cost significantly more. Not pulled out some money and admitted that he had brought payment, but now he saw it wouldn't be enough to fully cover the cost of the work. Jin waved his hand and said it would be enough if his friends bought him a drink when they returned from the mission. Dean laughed and promised to get him a whole barrel. Not in turn embraced the idea and said he would take care of the snacks as they were essential with drinks. He suggested preparing an entire cow carcass. Jin inwardly recoiled at the scale of it and wondered how anyone could eat so much meat. Chris approached and asked if he could join the company, to which Letzi said he wouldn't mind either, but only after they completed their quest. Not suggested they all meet back here to celebrate together after their return. Jin agreed and said they were then obligated to come back safe and sound. After that, he said goodbye, telling them it was time to go. Chris noted that they would stay a bit longer. Jin suddenly realized that Letzi lived in the same direction and was surprised by the coincidence. Letzi explained that he rented an apartment near the demonic forest gates because housing was cheaper there. He added that the landlord had warned him about a possible rent increase once modern toilets were installed. According to him, such amenities were currently very fashionable. Ash and Not looked at Jin with some expectation, causing him to sigh internally and think that they should stop looking at him like that. Ash said that a toilet with built-in plumbing was a very convenient thing. Not added that, recalling the past, he couldn't even imagine how he used to tolerate unpleasant smells. Jin mentally noted that the conversation was starting to sound like some strange sermon about the benefits of plumbing. Later, waking up in the morning, Jin decided to venture deeper into the demonic forest again. He cast a teleportation spell and focused on the day ahead. Jin intended to conduct another session of catching black spirits. He listed the names of the spirits he wanted to catch, calling them Blackie, Darky, and even Chernyshenko, musing that this would probably be enough for now. He thought that a cleanup team should be passing by somewhere nearby, although they probably hadn't set off yet. Jin admitted to himself that he would like to see the work of the mage from Amdio's squad. He decided to make a deal with the local spirits so they could tell him later how everything went. Then he went a little deeper into the forest, noting that the map he was given ended on the eastern side. Jin assumed that part of the forest was either outside the spirit's influence or inhabited by creatures no one had encountered yet. He decided to head there. Soon after, he encountered a massive three-horned boar. Jin instantly attacked it with his Zanzenkan sword, killing it with one precise strike. He remarked with satisfaction that this catch would make a delicious stew later. After storing the carcass, Jin noticed some wild asparagus and remembered he had wanted to cook it for a while. He thought about sharing the dish with his butler. Suddenly, a strange creature appeared nearby. Jin took a closer look and decided it wasn't a leopard, but rather a snow leopard. The leopard looked unusual and seemed to be trying to say something. A deer then appeared next to it and unexpectedly spoke in a human voice. The deer conveyed that it had a request to form a contract with a creature named Magyar. Jin was surprised to encounter another talking animal and wondered who they really were. He noticed the snow leopard had bitten its tail and lacked black spots on its body, leading him to speculate that it might be a sacred beast. Jin asked who Magyar was, and the deer replied that it was its friend. The situation was becoming increasingly strange and confusing. Jin clarified that the request for a contract was likely because Magyar was on the verge of transforming into a black spirit. The deer relayed that as compensation, they could create a sanctuary anywhere in the forest. Jin was surprised and asked what kind of sanctuary it was. The deer explained that it repelled monsters, black spirits, and other demonic creatures. Jin realized that such a place could be extremely useful as a base in the forest and as protection for spirit naming rituals. After a brief moment of thought, he agreed and asked where Magyar was. The deer told Jin to get on its back and added that it would show him the way itself. Jin agreed without further ado, deciding that something important and possibly fateful awaited him. Sitting on the deer's back, Jin said it was time to go and tried to keep his balance as it suddenly bolted forward. He asked the deer not to run so fast because the speed was too high. Jin mentally noted that he hadn't expected such swiftness from the creature and that it was hard to hold on. The deer suddenly stopped and Jin didn't react in time, flying off its back and landing directly on the ground. He got up and angrily said that the deer could have stopped more smoothly so he wouldn't fall from such a height. The deer calmly told Magyar that Mao had already returned. A tall horse with a proud posture emerged from the depths of the forest. She angrily asked why a human had been brought here. Jin realized with surprise that this was Magyar, the one the deer had mentioned. It crossed his mind that the name Mao probably belonged to the snow leopard he had seen earlier. He noticed that Magyar's body was darkening and part of his form was gradually evaporating, as if he was losing his connection to this world. Jin apologized and calmly stated that he intended to form a contract. He confirmed that he was indeed speaking to Magyar and tried to establish contact. Jin remembered that named spirits usually speak their original name first to the one they wish to contract with. He also knew that he could immediately give the spirit a new name, but if the spirit didn't resist, the bond would become significantly stronger. Magyar irritably said that he had no intention of making any contracts with a human. Jin understood from his tone that convincing him wouldn't be easy. He asked if Magyar intended to use a magic circle or a sealing cage, but warned that such methods wouldn't work against him. Magyar tried to retreat, but Jin quickly grabbed him by the neck, preventing him from leaving. The horse cried out in indignation, but Jin told him to stop being stubborn and say his name. The deer watched the scene and quietly murmured that it was terrible. Magyar angrily replied that humans didn't know their limits, but seeing Jin's determination, he reluctantly spoke his name anyway. Jin firmly repeated Magyar's name and offered to form a contract, to which Magyar reluctantly agreed. At that very second, Jin felt all the magical energy transfer to him, filling his body with a warm glow. He exhaled heavily and said that everything was fine now. The deer repeated that it was terrible, and Jin ironically thought he had heard that before. Then Jin reminded them about the sanctuary and asked if there was a place with a beautiful landscape where spirits could easily appear and rest. He added that he would like to choose a picturesque spot with a large tree and dense undergrowth. He especially wanted a water source or spring nearby, as it would give the place a special harmony. Mao was surprised by his request and said that humans certainly have their preferences. He offered Jin to ride the deer again to show him the way. Magyar smirked and said that the human was lucky. It's not every day you get to ride camel. Jin noted in his thoughts that the deer's name was Camel, and that he would have preferred a slightly more comfortable ride. Jin was surprised and thanked them, saying that the ride was even better than he expected. When they arrived at their destination, Mao said that they now needed to set up a barrier. He approached and erected a magical barrier enclosing the sanctuary in a glowing dome. Jin, a little worried, asked if the horse would be all right. Camel replied that nothing bad would happen because Magyar had now formed a contract and could freely pass through the barrier. Jin nodded and thanked him for the explanation. Camel said he was grateful for the man's help, and Jin responded that he was equally grateful for the trust. After that, Camel and Mao quickly disappeared deeper into the forest, dissolving into rays of light. Left alone, Jin took out his map and was surprised to see that it had changed. New areas that had not been marked before now appeared on it. He realized that the map expanded whenever he visited new places. But then Jin noticed that some of the marked areas were territories he hadn't been to, yet it was precisely there that he had formed a contract with Magyar. He wondered if the map might be connected to spiritual energy and displayed the world more broadly than he could see. Jin felt excited and decided that in these uncharted lands, he might find plants similar to those that grew in Japan. He was delighted and told himself that he now had a goal, to continue expanding the map and exploring the world further. Jin noted with satisfaction that he now had a new base to develop. He thought about how best to arrange this place, make it safe and beautiful so that spirits could gather there without fear. In the trading city of Naruadid, located on an island in the middle of the sea, Jin decided to study the local architecture to find inspiration for building a new home. He knew that this city was famous for its advanced technologies and artisans who created things that couldn't be found anywhere else. Jin looked at the buildings with interest and admired their elegant glass windows. They looked as if they were made of connected glass bottles, yet they possessed exceptional transparency. He noted that the glass in Kanuma looked rougher with bubbles and irregularities, and its green tint resembled the floats that the sea washes ashore. Walking down the street, Jin noticed a shop selling parchment and elegant document cases with fine engraving. He admired the skill of the local artisans. The neighboring shop sold not only beautiful dresses but also fabrics, confirming that Naruadid was a true trade hub, full of life and opportunities. His gaze was drawn to a display glass made of red glass with gold ornamentation. The price seemed high, but the beauty of the item made him momentarily forget his restraint. He pulled himself back, reminding himself that he had a specific goal and couldn't get too carried away with shopping. Next, Jin noticed a pharmacy and wondered how advanced medicine was in this city. Upon entering, he heard the merchant's greeting, who offered him a rare item. Jin immediately spotted cocoa beans on the counter and was surprised to find them sold there. The merchant explained that if these beans were ground and mixed with other ingredients, they could be used to make an elixir of life. Jin noted that without sugar, the taste would be bitter, but reminded himself that medicine didn't have to be pleasant. The merchant shared that recently, aristocrats had started adding sugar, milk, and vanilla to the drink, and now the product was gaining popularity. He speculated that due to rising demand, the price of cocoa beans would soon increase significantly. Jin realized that if this was true, it would be wiser to buy some now while they were still affordable. The merchant added that one bean weighed approximately 1 gram and cost about 2 mons. Jin thought this was quite expensive but decided to purchase a small quantity anyway. He reasoned that there was no point in traveling to where they were grown, as the production process was very complex and required time for fermentation and drying. He noted that if the price was so high in Naruadid, the beans would be even more expensive elsewhere. Besides cocoa, Jin bought some vanilla, yellow and brown mustard, and turmeric. All these products were already in his storage, but he wanted to compare their quality with local samples. As Jin left the shop, an elderly man approached him. He politely called out to him and admiringly commented on how beautiful his item was. Jin became wary and thought to himself that he might be dealing with a pervert who deserved a punch. However, the old man quickly apologized and clarified where Jin had bought his bag. Jin then calmed down and replied that it was a new item, recently registered by the Adventurers Guild in Azir, and that the bag was indeed convenient. The old man sadly said that the journey to Azir was too long, and he wouldn't be able to get there quickly. Jin mentally noted that the distance wasn't actually that great, but the road through the snowy mountains always turned into a challenge. He added aloud that it would be simpler to order the necessary documents and set up production of such bags right in the city. The old man agreed and thanked him for the conversation. After he left, Jin thought that this wasn't the first time he had been asked about his bag. It had happened about 10 times that day. He reasoned that only a few would actually decide to go to Azir. He also speculated that if merchants from Kanum came to Naruadid, new toilets would start being built here too, as the city's infrastructure left much to be desired. Staying overnight at an inn, he personally confirmed that the local restrooms were more disappointing than convenient. In the morning, Jin decided it was time to finish exploring the city and move on to the main purpose of his visit. As he passed another shop, a woman addressed him and asked if she could help with anything. Jin replied that he was looking for books about spirits. The woman explained that it wasn't a specialized store and advised him to visit a bookstore instead. Jin said he wasn't just looking for knowledge, but a good deal, because sometimes the information you need can be found where you least expect it. Jin recalled Ash's earlier words. Ash had explained that books describing methods for catching spirits couldn't be bought officially because such publications were considered forbidden. Ash added that if such books could be found anywhere, it would only be in Naruadid, a city known for trading rare and questionable items. That's why Jin had been wandering through local antique shops and stores with suspicious reputations for several days, hoping to find at least one valuable book. The woman then mentioned that such books were extremely difficult to acquire. Nowadays, nobles often bought up any old books just to impress guests and show off their wealth. According to her, many merchants even created personal libraries that weren't for reading, but merely for show. She warned Jin that by buying such books, he might not get what he was looking for. Jin thanked the woman and asked her to recommend a reliable store where he could genuinely find authentic books, not just pretty fakes. He followed her recommendation and soon entered another shop where he was greeted by a man. Jin said hello and asked if they were indeed having a book sale. The man nodded and clarified what kind of books the customer was interested in, with content or without. Jin was surprised and asked what without content meant. The seller calmly explained that their shop indeed sold empty boxes made to look like books. He added that such items were popular with those who wanted to decorate shelves or hide something inside. Jin thought it was quite strange, but at the same time he admitted that such decorations did look convincing. The man then said that besides decorative books, they also sold real manuscripts. However, sometimes the texts in them turned out to be unreadable because, in ancient times, spirits often interfered with the writing process. Jin became interested and asked about the price. The man said that such books were more expensive, but if the buyer knew how to handle them, they could restore them to their normal state. Jin carefully examined one of the old manuscripts and noticed that a spirit was indeed sitting on it. He assumed the text was written in a special mode that updated in real time. The seller explained that the book was created using a unique set of symbols that only the person who wrote it could read. Some mages and sorcerers deliberately encrypted their writings so that their works couldn't be read by others. Jin thought that thanks to his ability to understand various languages, he could even decipher invented scripts and complex word combinations. However, he still found it difficult to recognize texts where letters and symbols were intentionally scrambled. Flipping through the pages, he stumbled upon a mention of another volume that described methods for combining magic circles and diagrams. He asked the seller if there was a book with a similar cover. The man replied that there was indeed one, but it contained too many confusing illustrations and diagrams, and its price was quite high. Jin didn't hesitate, stating that he didn't care, and bought the book, deciding that any knowledge about spirits was worth the money. The seller thanked him for the purchase and wished him good luck. As Jin left the shop, he noted to himself that spirits hovered around these books, so they surely contained something important. Besides the rare manuscripts about spirits, he also acquired books on history, medicinal plants, and alcoholic beverages. He realized with satisfaction that he had achieved his goal, but noticed he had almost no money left, so he decided to head back home. At home, Jin studied the first book, which turned out to be about the advantages and risks of making contracts with spirits. It stated that risks could be reduced by correctly matching attribute compatibility and increasing mana. The positive aspects of such agreements depend on the spirit's nature, but all spirits have one thing in common: they respond when called by name. He also learned that mages and sorcerers often borrow power from nearby spirits, but these spirits aren't always close by, and their element might not be suitable for a specific purpose. This is precisely why making a contract with a spirit solves this problem. The book noted that if a fire spirit is summoned in a cold place, it will struggle to exert its power, as external conditions affect their stability. Jin pondered how he hadn't previously considered how much spirits differed, even though he often saw them nearby. He recalled the spirits Misto and Halalfa, who shared the same light attribute but differed in behavior and character. Jin thought that some encounters with spirits were better left unremembered, as some of them had caused him anxiety and bewilderment. He sighed and admitted that he shouldn't dwell on that mysterious ball of light that had given him trouble. Jin was preparing breakfast. Not joyfully remarked that hot meals in the morning were a rare treat, and every dish he cooked tasted simply excellent. Jin smiled and replied that he was glad if his food was to everyone's liking. He noted mentally that Ash and the others were going on a punitive expedition today and had already eaten all the perishable food in their house, so he had invited them over. He knew that breakfast in this world usually consisted of bread and baked goods, and only a few people could afford meat or dried fruit. Vegetable soups are typically eaten cold here, so his hot dishes genuinely delighted his guests. As everyone ate, Jin, looking at their satisfied faces, calmly said that they probably weren't used to cooking in the mornings and preferred something simple. Not calmly explained that they don't cook in the mornings and only make tea. Everything else, he said, they buy from street vendors. When the sun just begins to rise, people are already rushing to work, and they simply don't have time to cook. Plus, constantly making a fire is pretty tough, especially in the morning when every minute counts. Jin listened to the explanation and simply nodded, showing he understood everything. Ash thanked him for breakfast and said it was time for them to leave, otherwise they might be late for the expedition. Jin stopped them and handed over a package containing a packed lunch. He mentioned there was enough food for them to share with Dean and the rest of the group. He also wished them to be careful and avoid getting into dangerous situations. Ash thanked him once more, said goodbye, and headed for the exit with Not. As Not left, he again expressed his gratitude for the meal. Once the door closed behind them, Jin quietly said that now was the perfect time to buy building materials. After he had acquired everything, he turned to Rich and informed him that a safe zone had appeared in the forest where construction could begin. He suggested Rich come with him, and Rich happily agreed. Jin activated the teleport and they quickly moved to the designated location. Upon arriving, Jin noticed that the spirits, who had always been nearby before, had suddenly vanished. He was surprised and speculated that Rich might have scared them off. Jin then allowed his companion to play for a bit, but warned him not to cross the barely visible glowing barrier line protecting the area. After that, he decided to clear the space to make room for the construction of his future home. As he retrieved materials from storage, Jin pondered the design of his future dwelling. He decided to build a small but cozy two-story house with one room on each floor. On the first floor, he planned to create a relaxation and tea area where they could sit without taking off their shoes. He wanted to reserve the second floor for sleeping and personal space. Besides the house itself, Jin dreamed of planting a garden nearby and creating a place where Rich could play peacefully without disturbing his work with the spirits. He thought that now that the safe zone was established, Rich could stay with him during the day while he focused on naming the spirits. Construction required plaster, stone, wood, and bricks, especially for the fireplace, which Jin considered an important element of coziness. Purchasing all the necessary materials took him several days, and it turned out to be much more difficult than he had anticipated. When everything was ready, he wiped the sweat from his brow and told himself it would be good to take a lunch break. Jin began to think about the future garden and how best to arrange it. Jin noticed that Rich showed immense interest in everything around him and happily observed every little detail. Therefore, he decided that the garden could have a little bit of everything: herbs, flowers, and perhaps even fruit trees. He imagined how the walls of his house would be adorned with grapevines and climbing roses, giving the structure a lively and cozy appearance. It also occurred to him to make a siphon for brewing coffee so he could enjoy an aromatic drink while relaxing. At that moment, Mao unexpectedly appeared beside him. Several more creatures emerged behind him, a deer and even a horse. Jin looked at them in surprise, wondering why they had all gathered there. He felt their strange gazes on him, as if the animals wanted to say something. Soon, Magyar approached him and, noticing what was happening, asked why Mr. Rich was standing next to him. Jin froze and uttered a single word in surprise, expressing his confusion about the situation.